I think God might be real, just not in the way you think, by Weather's writing. When I was 3 years old, I was in a really bad car accident. I didn't know it at the time, but that singular event would come to define everything about my life moving forward. What I remember about the accident is mostly a collage of backdated comments I was able to reel out of my father in the following years. He was driving me and my mom in his old '91 Chevy Tahoe through the twisting backroads of southern Illinois, weaving his way through the gnarled branches of oak trees which interlocked into a braided ceiling overhead. A fog had rolled in, giving the impression that we were driving through a cloudy tube. Everything was simultaneously bright and opaque. I didn't mind, though. I was in the back seat working on a coloring book. My mom was in the front, talking with my dad or turning around to entertain my completed pictures. Although I was of the age where my memory was just beginning to mature, I still recall two things very clearly from the accident. First was the sensation of braking. I remember feeling the way a plate must feel to be dropped, weightless at first, then suddenly meeting a much larger, more solid object. The air popped like a firecracker, and the entirety of my body shattered into hundreds of fractals. And then, I remember a hand. It was my dad's hand pulling me from the wreck. I ended up hospitalized for weeks after the crash. My mom was less lucky. The impact killed her instantly. As I've alluded to, I was young, and at the time I didn't fully understand the implications of what had happened. I knew something was missing, but it was like a word on the tip of my tongue, or the forgotten vanilla in a cherished cake recipe, coloring my experience, but not the whole of it. Not like my dad. For him, it was the whole fucking cake. He had somehow made it out with only a few scratches. I'm sure he had a really bad case of survivor's guilt, and frankly, looking back, I wouldn't have blamed him if he slumped into despair and spent his days drinking away his sorrow. But he wasn't that type of man. He got help. It took him years before he was able to recall anything that happened that morning, and most of it is still repressed. But he shared with me what he could, or at least that's what I thought. My dad was a middle school teacher since before I was born, and he kept his job until very recently. As a result, we didn't have much in the way of resources. I grew up on Disney Channel and TV dinners for the most part, but I didn't mind. When I became of school age, his job actually made caring for me pretty convenient. Since our elementary and middle schools were connected, he was able to drive me there and back each day. It was around 3rd or 4th grade that I realized I was different. I didn't understand the other children, or even the adults most of the time. They would say things, and then immediately change their mind, or they would talk about something, and in the next breath forget its existence entirely. I remember one day at lunch. I had just gotten my tray of hot food and sat down with some friends. One of the kids, Alex, was talking about a stuffed bird he had won for getting first place in Mr. Curtis's pop-up math competition. We were all admiring its blue wings and its white belly, and its sharp black beak and its beady eyes. I left mid-conversation to get a chocolate milk. When I came back, I asked to see the bird again, and Alex said, "What bird?" I was perplexed. "The bird, the blue jay you were just showing us." I remember all of the other kids looking at me like I was crazy. I figured they were all playing a trick on me. So I got up and went over to Alex's seat and crouched down, looking under the table. Then I sprung up and tried to open his lunchbox. "What are you doing?" he yelled. I felt so confused and embarrassed that I ran to the bathroom to cry. And then there was another time a group of kids were laughing about a joke one of the girls, Taylor, had made about our homeroom teacher's face looking like a seal. I knew it was mean, but at the same time I just wanted to fit in, so I played along. But when I made a comment about her resemblance to the semi-aquatic animal, they all looked at me confused. "What are you talking about? You never said that." These misattributions kept happening, and it led to me being ostracized from most of the little childish cliques that popped up. I developed a quasi-standoffish temperament, which I used as a shield against the chaotic world that I didn't understand. My dad eventually had me tested for ASD, autism spectrum disorder, but I passed the test. He asked if I wanted to move to a different town with different schoolmates, thinking that perhaps I was getting bullied, but I told him it was fine. Somewhere deep down, I felt like no matter where I went, this problem would follow me. You may think that I was simply coping with the absence of my mom, and while I'm sure that her absence had left a certain hole in my life, kindly, no, that wasn't what was happening. You see, at first I didn't notice these instances of what I'll call blinking. I simply thought it was me misremembering things. Objects, words, events. They were all little things anyways. A little bird, a joke, my pencil box. It wasn't until 6th grade that I realized the magnitude of the phenomenon. I was in my dad's 6th grade social studies class, and we had just been assigned our Ancient Civilizations project, which involved creating a diorama of our chosen civilization and presenting its features to the class. My friend at the time, Claire, had taken my first choice of ancient Rome, which we had a heated argument about at lunch, so I was left with the ancient Egypt. At the time, all I pictured for Egypt was a plate of sand. However, my dad and I went through some illustrated history books and some pictures on the internet, and he really built up the project for me. Over the course of a couple months, he helped me shape 3 pyramids out of small wooden planks and a bunch of tan clay. We placed them in the center of a giant square shoebox lid which served as the container for our diorama. Then he bought some small wooden mannequin puppets and we dressed them up in cloth clothes, mostly kilts and tunics, and colored their eyes, mouths, and hair. We added a few obelisks and some small box huts which were collected into a little village around the Nile. Finally, we added a light glaze of glue where we felt it would be necessary, and then covered the whole project in golden glitter. As we worked on part of the diorama, my dad helped me understand what we were adding and why it was important to ancient Egypt. I loved the way he talked about history. He spun everything into a miraculous story. To this day, I don't think I've ever had a teacher who came close to his level of charisma and creativity. As a result, I became really proud of my diorama. I memorized all the little details and rehearsed my speech in front of the mirror for hours leading up to the last couple of weeks of class. And then, 2 days before I was supposed to give my presentation, everything fell apart. First, I need to apologize for deceiving you about an aspect of my story. I thought it might help you understand what I was going through at the time. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, I get that, but please hear me out. The truth is, I was never assigned to present on ancient Egypt. Everything else about Claire taking my first pick and my dad helping me with the whole project and my excitement leading up to the presentation was all true. But it wasn't a project on ancient Egypt. It was a project on ancient Suicidal, which was a civilization located on the 8th continent called Catalan, the same name as the spoken language but unrelated, which was due west of Australia and the Indian Ocean. I know this sounds incredible, and if you want to believe it's all in my head, I get that, but I remember clearly all sorts of facts about it. The Malagasy, the same people who populated Madagascar, were the first peoples to discover Catalan and settle it. However, about 500 years later, Indian ships would arrive and create the civilization known as Suicidal, a pidgin language formed between the indigenous population and the new arriving Indians called Haisa. Catalan had a warm climate with plenty of natural resources, but Suicidal had a dense enough population to require agricultural production. They grew rice, grain, sugarcane, vegetables, and even tobacco. I remember all of these facts and more. My diorama reflected the main features of the Suicidal civilization. And then 2 days before my presentation, I woke up and my diorama was entirely different. The hilly grasslands were traded out for sandy dunes. The Hindu statues in the stone palaces became clay pyramids and large spear-like pillars. And everything was covered in the ickiest yellow glitter I'd ever seen. Tears stung my eyes as I trampled over to my dad's room and banged on his door. "Dad, what did you do?" I yelled. "Honey?" He responded, rushing over to the base of the stairs. "What's wrong?" "The diorama! It's ruined!" "It's what?" he asked and ran up the stairs leading to my room. He looked over it for a few seconds, checking to see if everything was intact, then said, "I don't see it, honey. Where is it ruined?" I was completely dumbstruck. What did he mean he didn't see it? "All of it!" I shouted. "The whole thing is wrong. Where's the grass and the stone buildings and the lady with the 4 arms and the elephants? Where's my project?" My dad looked at me in silence. "Lauren, baby, what civilization do you think you were working on?" "Ancient Cedavan, of course. We've been working on this for months now, Dad. Please tell me you remember." He knelt down and put his hands on my shoulders. "Honey, your project was on ancient Egypt." There is no ancient C. Devon. You're lying, I protested. Books! You have books on your bookshelf! He took me into his study and showed me all of his books. None of them were on ancient C. Devon. He even turned on his computer and typed in the name of the civilization, but all that came up was a near match, Sidon. I remember feeling the sudden urge to puke. My entire body felt like it was pumping battery acid instead of blood. I don't, I started, but suddenly my head felt very light, and I fainted. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I'd lost consciousness for over half an hour, enough time for my dad to call 911 and have the ambulance transport me to the nearest ER. They ran all sorts of tests on me, but they all came back fine. After a couple hours of IV fluids and monitoring, they released me with my dad. I ended up skipping the rest of school that week. Dad didn't make me present my diorama. In fact, he never brought the subject up again. Part of me was glad. I just wanted to forget the whole thing ever happened. But another part of me couldn't move past what was clearly the most absurd thing to ever happen to me. About a week after the incident, I tried to broach the subject, but when I asked my dad about it, he didn't seem to remember our conversation at all. He said I had fallen ill and that's why I needed to go to the ER and miss class. I felt like I was going crazy. If I was older, I probably would have voluntarily checked myself into a psychiatric ward, but I was young and helpless, alone. I decided that if I just ignored the changes well enough, I could still get along. This proved difficult, though, as the blinking would only exasperate in the coming months. Up until the time of the project, I hadn't been able to directly observe the phenomenon. It was always in retrospect that things disappeared. It was during the summer after 6th grade that it changed. I still remember the first time it happened. I had just gotten out of the shower and I was drying my hair in front of the mirror. After it was dried, I threw my clothes on and went to tie my hair up in a ponytail. But as I went to set the elastic tie, I felt its weight dissipate on my hand. I grasped and held my hand out. The circular black band was gone. Fast forward to 7th grade, the blinking had spiraled out of control. Reflecting back on it, most people would have probably assumed I was drinking psilocybin-infused water, as the delusions were somewhat consistent with psychedelic phenomena. Except these distortions were real. At least they felt that way to me. I'd wake up and grab the box of Special K, but end up eating Cheerios. The McDonald's logo would look yellow and red one day, and purple and black the next. I'd be watching a show, and then a different show, and then a different one. It was as if the entire universe was a Christmas tree with millions of lights, and the lights kept shifting hues randomly, faster and faster, and I was the only one who could see their changing colors. I remember one night my dad made spaghetti for dinner, and we went out onto the porch to eat it. While we were sitting, I saw our neighbor's house, a 2-story townhome, blink and become a single-story bungalow. I gasped. My dad asked what was wrong, but when I tried to explain, he gave me a strange look. For him, no matter what changed, the world was always that way. While for me, it didn't have a way. The situation peaked when Claire, that friend I mentioned before, disappeared. I texted her. My dad had bought me a BlackBerry in the beginning of summer break, but I didn't get a response. And when I asked her other friends if they knew where she was, I got the usual, "What are you talking about?" Look, I knew right away what had happened, even though I didn't want to believe it. I went to the teacher and asked if there was a Claire in our class, and she said no. I broke down in front of everyone. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of school. The lady at the front desk tried to stop me, but I just barreled past her. I kept running until I got to the big park across the street, and I bawled my eyes out until the police arrived and escorted me home. When they tried asking me what was wrong, I didn't say anything. There was literally nothing I could say that they would understand. That night, I prayed to God for the first time. My dad wasn't a religious man. He went to Catholic church with my mom when she was alive. But after she died, he never went back. Still, I knew how to pray, even if I never did it. I copied some of the people I saw praying in movies and interlocked my fingers and knelt down on my bed, stuffing my head into a pillow, "Dear God," I said, "please, please, please help me." I told him about my struggles and asked him to make them stop. I spent an hour saying the same things over and over again. And when I was finished, my little body was so tired, I fell right asleep. I knew something was different the second I opened my eyelids. I didn't only feel relieved, I felt embraced. I felt like someone was watching over me, and I felt like I wasn't alone. I moved through my day with cautious apprehension. I didn't want to get my hopes up only to be let down, but to my surprise, the blinking had stopped. At least I couldn't remember any of the inconsistencies, and to me that was a win. I began to pray regularly, and the more I did, the more I could feel the sense that someone was looking out for me. It was like I was getting a big hug from some cosmic force that loved me and wanted me to be happy. I made it a habit to pray regularly. I asked my dad if he could take me to church, and he agreed to take me to St. Mark's, the same church that he and my mom used to attend. Over time, I realized that the actual church services weren't as important to me as the praying. For whatever reason, there was something about praying that was like glue for my brain, holding the entire universe together. As I got older, I considered that maybe it wasn't that the changes were no longer happening, but that I simply didn't see them anymore. In other words, maybe I was becoming just like everyone else. Either way, I didn't mind. In my teenage years, I got into mindfulness meditation. I thought that I'd want to go into religious studies and become a theologian, so I started to learn about Eastern traditions, in addition to Christianity. I joined a bunch of different school clubs to meet kids of different faiths: Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. I tried to find a common thread which linked them all and would explain what happened to me as a child. The metaphors of heaven and hell, good and evil, the Taoist and the yin and yang, duality. Every religion seemed to speak about the way of being that would lead to a better place. In some cases, that better place was a physical future existence. In others, it was merely being in contact with the perfection of nature or the present. Metaphorically, the teachings could explain what I had gone through in a kind of loose way, but there were no explicit statements about my condition. I want to fast forward to why I've decided to write about this now. To give you an idea of where I'm at, I'm now 25 and working on finishing my MA in computational linguistics. I know that's a bit of a switch from what I was thinking when I was a teenager, but I'm really only interested in religion because of the value praying afforded me as a child. I didn't actually have much interest in the subject itself. After my first year of college, I changed to an English major, which ultimately led me to taking a linguistics class, and I enjoyed it so much that I switched tracks in my junior year. Considering the state of the world, I thought minoring in computer science might help me financially in the future, so I ended up charting a path which I figured might lead to something like developing translation software. Anyway, everything was going fine until a few weeks ago. I was out at an all-night diner with a few of my friends from the program. There was Jeremy, Martin, Bella, Jordan, and Macy. We had been working on a group project together involving modeling construction grammars by generating primitive 3D structures using C# and running the code through a game engine. It's a bit weird, but essentially we were trying to create a multidimensional model for language using the same but more advanced concept than other LLMs, and just had a breakthrough. It was 2 a.m. though, and not a brain cell existed between the 6 of us, so instead we focused on a different problem. Macy's ongoing breakup with her semi-long-distance trucker boyfriend. We tried to explain my mic wasn't going to work out as we ordered a round of milkshakes and waited for the lone overnight kitchen worker to scoop out 3 balls of ice cream from the Dean's carton for each of us, blend it, and then have the server deliver the vintage diner glasses on a plastic tray. I dug into my thick strawberry shake with a spoon. It was delicious. I kept eating, but focused back on the conversation. I remember feeling something odd about one of the scoops, but I was so entrenched in Macy's story that I didn't notice the metal shard in my ice cream until I felt it against my lip. I spat out the shard and ice cream all in one motion, and then covered my mouth, which I was sure was bleeding. The silver blade was probably as large as my thumb, and it had 2 jagged edges, as if fastened there for the purpose of causing damage. "What the fuck?" I yelled. Everyone at the table turned to see what was the matter. "Hey, Lauren, you okay?" I spoke through a covered mouth, using my free hand to point to the table. "That was in my..." But it was gone. "In your shake? Was something in your shake?" asked Jeremy. I froze. In that moment, the stories of my childhood that I had only remembered as faint nightmares came back in a wave of crushing terror. How could I have been so stupid to think they would simply vanish forever? No, this is not the same thing, I thought, but deep down I knew it was. I drew my hand away from my lips and saw that it was dry. No blood. When I looked back up, all of the blood in my veins went cold. My friends were smiling at me. Their lips were elastic like taffy, stretching to reveal their teeth. I could feel them radiating malevolence, as if the only thing holding them back from picking up their utensils and stabbing me to death was some thinly veiled force field. The moment lasted for what felt like half a minute, and then Jordan said 2 words which made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Found you." The words ricocheted in my now adrenaline-powered skull. But just as he spoke them, the world blinked and my friends were back. Bella reached out and grabbed my hand. I pulled away, but when I saw her concerned expression, I relented. "Sorry, guys. I think I'm gonna have to call it," I said. "You sure, El?" asked Jordan. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Yeah, thanks. I stumbled for a lie. But when one wouldn't come, Martin stood up and said he'd walk me out to my car. "Thanks," I said as I got into my little 2015 Jetta. "It's just been a long day." "No problem, Lauren. You know, if there's ever anything..." I know. I said, but didn't mean. Some things just couldn't be shared. I drove for about 5 minutes before stopping at a gas station. I pulled in and parked near the back. Then I interlocked my fingers and prayed for about half an hour. I apologized for not taking my praying seriously and asked once again to be granted peace. Unlike my younger years, I also drifted into other avenues of thought. I imagined my mom. I pictured the whole arc of my life, all of the little decisions that led me to where I was. I cried for a long time. I felt like that little girl again, reaching out for help. I still felt so lost, so out of control. There were so many things missing, and I was so confused. I decided then to take a trip back home and visit my dad, who was now working as a private tutor. He made enough prepping affluent students for the ACT and SAT that he could spend his free time pursuing his real passions, reading and writing. When I arrived at his doorstep that weekend, he greeted me with open arms. "How are you, kiddo? It's been what, a year or so?" It was actually more like 2 years, but I didn't tell him. Just smiled and nodded. "Well, come on in." The house was almost exactly how I remember it. Linoleum floors, beige walls, a few scattered pictures, the scent of chamomile. Everything minimalist. There was a quaintness, a prettiness to the way everything seemed to be well kept in a perfect place. From the cherrywood chairs we'd sit on to eat, to the cream-colored love seat, I felt at home. I spent the drive thinking of what I would talk to my dad about. But ultimately I wasn't sure what I'd say. I loved my dad, but I think growing up it was easy to see him as naive. After all, arguably the most important episodes of my childhood were completely unknown to him. In that way, I kinda loved him from a distance. Maybe losing my mom also played into that. Maybe I just had trust issues. And after what happened at the diner, luckily there hadn't been any blinks since. I stayed for a couple days, and he showed me around some of the different coffee shops where he'd tutor kids or write some of his stories. I met some of his friends, mostly other retired or part-time teachers who were in a similar place in life. I was happy for him. Then, on Sunday, he made me my favorite meal growing up, homemade carbonara pasta with chicken and broccoli. The sauce had a few different cheeses, butter, olive oil, and raw egg yolk. It was a perfect blend of creamy, savory, and sweet. After we ate, he cracked open a scrapbook of some old photos and other clippings he had put together. We reminisced about the past and laughed whenever I'd cover up one of my awkward pictures. He brought up some stories from school that I had forgotten, naming some teachers that I hadn't thought about in years. Apparently, I had started at the end, because as I moved to the other end of the book, I kept getting younger and younger. I flipped to the last page and noticed a couple of pictures of my mom that made my heart sink. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" said my dad. I agreed. I flipped to the last page and saw a collage of newspaper clippings. One of them was related to the accident. It was headlined, "Two survived head-on collision." After a cursory glance at the text, I noticed something odd. It said, both the husband and child, a 3-year-old girl, sustained life-threatening wounds. The husband was found unconscious on the scene. The girl was found 20 meters away from the vehicle crying. I swallowed, trying to remember back to what happened that day. The feeling of crashing, of the world slowing down, then breaking, returned. And then there was a hand. My dad's hand. Or was it? If he was unconscious, who pulled me out of that wreck? I looked up at my dad. He was smiling. I shot up and started to back away slowly towards the door. No, not you too. What is this? What's happening? Who are you? My dad, or whatever was controlling him, laughed. "Oh, Lauren, Lauren, Lauren. You know who we are." He purred as he stood up. He lifted his hand and the lights began to flicker and then bend in a way which wouldn't have been possible. Dark figures began to propagate from the shadows along the walls. The pictures nailed there began to blink out of existence. I turned to run towards the door, but the handle was gone. Glass shards materialized all around me and swarmed me like locusts. Certain I was going to die, I dropped to my knees and once again turned to prayer, this time asking God to directly intervene and save me. Everything went quiet. Honey, are you okay?" I didn't trust his voice. I knew if I opened my eyes, I'd see that awful smile. He was just toying with me. "It's not you," I said, in between my muttering prayers. "I know it's not you." "Honey," my dad said, closer. I felt his arm wrap around me. This was it. I was going to be suffocated. I waited for the inevitable crushing weight of my chest collapsing. I waited to break all over again. "I would never hurt you, Lauren. I love you more than anything in this world." I burst out in tears. "No, it's not you. It's not you. You don't exist." My dad's weight dissipated. I opened my eyes and saw that he was no longer there. "Dad?" I called aloud. "Dad! Where'd you go?" I checked all over the house, but there was no trace of him. There were still pictures of him all over the house, so I knew he hadn't blinked out of existence like everything else. But somehow he was missing. I left the house and got a room at a hotel, where I am now. I'm sure at this point that whatever's happening to me is no longer random. Something out there is actively trying to hunt me. Maybe it has been my whole life, but only now it can see me, however weird that sounds. If that's right, then God has been on my side to protect me from this demon, monster, devil, whatever it is. Regardless, the methods I was using when I was younger are no longer going to cut it. I already posted my story on several other small circles and have gotten one reply. A man who goes by the name of Trent. Apparently it's an alias. He said that he has some insight into my condition and can offer to help if I want it. I'm planning on meeting him tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's a good idea, but at this point I need answers. I can keep you updated with my progress if that interests you. And to anyone who knows anything about what's happening to me, please, I could really use your help. I was just about to post this when Trent sent another message. This is what it says. Trent. We can do the redacted at redacted o'clock. Also, if what you're telling me is true, your mother may still be alive. Back during the peak blinking crisis, I remember having a lot of difficulty sleeping. It was common for me to average only 4 or 5 hours a night, and the little sleep I did get was marred by terrible nightmares. One in particular recurred many times. I was only 8, but somehow I was in the driver's seat of our family's old SUV. My arms were long enough to steady the wheel, but my legs didn't quite reach the pedals. It didn't matter, though, since the car seemed content to continue at a constant pace. I looked over and saw my mom in the passenger seat. Her face was a blurry likeness pieced together from the dozens or so pictures I'd seen of her over the years. I tried to bring her into focus, not only because I missed her dearly, but because she was speaking, pleading even. She waved frantically at me, and then brought her leg up and slammed it down on the floor mat several times. I didn't understand what had her so upset until she pointed out the front windshield, and I saw we were hurtling directly towards a giant tree that had fallen in the middle of the road. Panicking, I stomped for the brake, but my seatbelt protested and pulled me back like an invigorated dog on a short leash. I sat up and tried clicking it off, but I wouldn't budge. My breaths became hollow cries, and I felt my heart beat against the bars of its bony prison. I grabbed the steering wheel, I pulled it to the left, and then to the right, attempting to swerve off the road. But it was as if whatever kind of glue was locking up the seatbelt was also fixing the steering wheel in place. "Mom, what do I do?" I yelled, tears streaming from my eyes. She was yelling back at me, but it was as if there was a divider between us. Neither of us could hear each other. I turned back just in time to see the giant oak tree meet the front bumper, and then I jolted awake with a piercing pain in my chest that radiated up through my throat in the form of a giant scream. My little legs kicked under the covers and tears rained down on my pillow until my dad ran in and knelt at my bed. "Lauren, are you okay? Did you have a bad dream?" I grabbed my pillow and hugged it so my face was covered, and then effused in a long wheeze while rocking to the other side. "Oh, honey," he soothed and brushed my hair, then the tears from my face when I would allow it. Time would pass in silence, and when I began to get the sense that my dad was ready to leave, I'd chirp out, "Stay?" in that way children do when they're embarrassed about wanting something. "Always," my dad would reply, and then he'd post up on the floor with my large tomato plushie as a pillow. One night in particular, it was deep in the night. I had awoken to a tapping sound outside my window. I was so afraid that a monster had snuck into my room while I wasn't looking that I made him stay next to me and face outward. I'd peek my eyes open every minute or so to check to make sure that my dad was there, staking out the room. Eventually, he rolled in close and said something that I still remember to this day. "Hey, baby, guess what?" he whispered. I mumbled. "I think you scared the monster away." I tried to picture this through the fog of my fatigue. Something seemed off about the statement, like it wasn't logically possible. But before I could piece together the words to express that, my dad cut back in. "It was scared because it realized you're a superhero. You know what your greatest superpower is?" I shook my head, making sure to rub my forehead against his shoulder so he could sense it in the dark room. "Your greatest power is that you get to tell the monsters what to do. Because the monsters are only as strong as the stories you tell about them. And there's all kinds of stories. There's happy ones, there's sad ones, scary ones. Tell me, this monster you think snuck in, would you say he's part of a scary story?" "I don't know," I said, confused. "Maybe." He hummed, contemplating. "Well, I want you to remember this. You have the ability to tell any kind of story you want to. Maybe there are monsters, but that means there's heroes and angels too, right?" I was beginning to doze off to the comforting sound of my dad's deep voice, but I gave another affirmative. "So, if you're ever scared, honey, just dream up a better story. A story that will bring you peace. You understand?" I was already out. I woke up the next morning to the feeling that someone was in the hotel room with me. The drapes were drawn, and the only sound was the AC unit blowing cold air. But when I looked towards the dark corner of the room at the empty coat rack, my mind conjured the face of my dad, smiling at me, chanting that same awful line. "Oh, Lauren, you know who we are." I was no longer a child. but it took a couple of minutes of cold focus before I muscled the courage to ascend from the safety of my covers and flick on the lamplight. The small amber radius extended to where my dad's feet would have been if he'd been standing there. But there was no one. I let out a sigh and collapsed back onto the mattress, thinking back on all those years growing up. The same man who had helped me conquer my fear of the dark was now the monster hiding in its shadow. I looked over my shoulder, and I saw the clock read 10:15. My meeting with Trent was in 3 hours. I moaned and stretched my arms and back until they knocked against the headboard. Then I collapsed back onto the mattress, meditating, gathering energy like a compressed spring. All at once, I jumped up and glided over to the drapes, opened them in a single fluid motion. I grimaced at the sunlight, but the warmth felt good against my face. I stopped by the nightstand and gulped down the final few swigs of a bottle of mellow yellow that I had purchased from the vending machine the previous night, then undressed and hopped in the shower. The warm water wasn't enough to wash away the previous night's memories. When I closed my eyes to lather my hair, I was back in my living room, standing opposite the demon that had taken on my dad's form. His smile, his laugh, it was like someone in my head was flipping a switch between the man I loved growing up and a terrible monster. But the fear was more powerful. I heard something drop onto the tile floor on the other side of the curtain. The noise made me gasp and open my eyes while shampoo was still streaming down my face. I swiped the shampoo out of my now burning eyes and squinted into the curtain, trying to see through it, but I couldn't make anything out. Is anyone? I started, trembling, afraid to finish the sentence. I reached out and pinched the end of the curtain. My heart was in overdrive. I swallowed, and then pulled it towards me and peeked out. I scanned the room, but I couldn't see anything out of place. It wasn't until after I finished showering and wound myself up in one of the hotel's 2 small towels that I saw what had made the noise. I bent down and picked up the stub of a razor blade that had fallen onto the tile right next to the puffy gray shower rug. It wasn't mine. I was pretty sure hotels don't keep unguarded razor blades just laying around. When I held it up, it occurred to me that if it had simply fallen a few inches to the left, it would have been buried in the rug, and perhaps I would have stepped on it. I stared at myself in the steely reflection, cold, lonely, small. What if I was all I was able to think before the blade blinked out of my hand? I threw on some clothes, packed up a few belongings I had into my purse, then checked out of my room. I didn't feel safe going back home after what happened, but I also didn't want to go anywhere else. I got in the car and drove aimlessly up and down the town streets, focusing only on the car ahead of me. Anytime I started to travel down an avenue of thought, I'd make a turn or speed up, hit the brakes, anything to keep my mind distracted. It was sweltering outside, but I'd turn the heat on for a minute at a time until I felt drenched, then toggle max AC until I was cool, and then back to the heat. I repeated the basic driving tenet, 10 and 2, 10 and 2, 10 and 2, like a mantra, a chant to focus my attention on a single point. And then I pictured that point disappearing. I began to think that maybe I wanted to disappear. I fully intended to keep going that way until 1 o'clock, but after about 30 minutes, my meandering route had led me to St. Mark's Catholic Church, where a large group of people were gathered around a long line of tables in front of the building. I slowed down. At the front of the venue was a large, white cardboard sign which read, "Plant a seed, share the joy." I wasn't sure what that meant, but my boredom had come to a head. I rationalized that if there was any place on God's green earth that would be safe, it was this one. I parked along the closest side street, then walked over to the church. Rows of white tables were covered with cardboard boxes filled with small plants that were wrapped in individual paper pots. I watched from a distance as people behind the tables carefully removed the plants, one by one, and offered them to passers-by. I continued down the line, a sheep in the herd, and allowed myself to sink into childhood memories. I had somehow made it out the other end near the narthex when I heard a woman's voice call to me. "Hey, dearie, have you gotten one yet?" I turned and saw a small, gray-haired lady with rose-colored glasses. "Oh, no," I started, attempting to decline, then paused. The old lady grabbed one of the plants and held it out for me. "Here," she said. "Come on, I won't bite." "As far as you know," I thought, then stumbled forward with a sigh. "Thanks," I sighed and took the plant. "What is this all for, anyway?" "Well, it's a giveaway," the old woman responded. "Staff have been growing these plants, tomatoes and garlic mainly, so they could offer them to members of the parish. The idea is to have the members grow the produce, and then donate it to St. Mark's Food Pantry to give it to those in need." "Oh, that's actually pretty cool," I replied, and inspected my plant, which was at present nothing more than a small green stem. "So, which kind is this one?" "Oh, that one is..." The old lady stopped and inspected the other plants near where she had grabbed mine. "Tomato." "Tomato," I repeated. "Well, thanks again." "Of course, dear," the old lady beamed. "We're all responsible for each other." I nodded, and then continued back through the crowd towards my car. When through the large vestibule windows, I saw a priest speaking to a young couple. It had been a little over a decade since I had attended a service. I stopped going during high school when I started studying for other religions, and I didn't recognize this priest. He was short, just over 5 feet tall, bald, African-American. He wore the customary black robe and white collar, and there was something in his smile and the way he seemed to be affirming the couple that made me yearn to speak with him. I considered for a moment, a bit embarrassed to be stepping back into the church after all this time, but the thought of being able to burn 10 minutes talking with someone who might have some insight into my situation was too tempting to pass up. I waited near a portrait of Mary Magdalene, my tomato plant in hand, staring off at the pristine series of stained glass images portraying the death and resurrection of Jesus. About a minute in, the priest met my eyes. He smiled, his way of telling me he knew I was waiting, then finished up with the couple and made his way over. He had a bit of an accent when he spoke. It was Ugandan, from the best I could tell. "Hello, miss. I don't believe I've had the pleasure," he said, and held out his hand. He leaned in as he spoke, and his smile tugged at the corner of his eyes, which were already marked with use. I shook his hand and returned what I'm sure was a weak smile. "No, I don't think so. My name's Lauren. I used to come here when I was little. It's been a while." "Well, you picked a good day to visit, if you're into gardening, that is," he remarked with a laugh and gestured towards the plant. "It's nice to meet you, Lauren. My name is Martin, or Father Martin, if you prefer." "Father Martin," I repeated. "I have a friend named Martin. It's a good name." He laughed and said, "Thank you. I'll pass that one along to my mother. She loves the praise." I laughed back. He carried himself in such a carefree way that I was put immediately at ease, almost to the point where I forgot what I wanted to talk to him about. I started, attempting to word my question in a way that didn't sound like I needed psychiatric help. "I have a couple of religious questions for you, if you have time." "That is what I am for. Ask away." "They're about miracles, like the ones in the Bible. I was wondering, do you think that miracles still happen today?" "Miracles? You mean like water into wine?" "Kind of, yeah." He contemplated. "Well, I haven't seen them myself. You know, I may be a priest, but I also have a degree in physics. I think that God made the world according to laws, right? But I do think God has the power to intervene. Yes, I've just never seen it. Like, you know, the biblical type of miracles. To me, there are miracles happening all around us. Miracles we can't see." "Exactly," I responded, thinking about how no one else could see the blinks. "Those kind of miracles. What are those miracles we can't see?" One of Father Martin's eyebrows raised, and he rubbed his chin. "Well, I think one of the greatest miracles is the miracle of God's love, which was perfected in Christ and offered to each of us. It's his power to heal even the most troubled mind. By coming into alignment with God's will for us, we can see the true purpose of this existence." No, he's not getting it, I thought. I scrambled to my other entry point. "What about the story of Job? God made a bet with the devil that Job would stay faithful to him no matter what the devil did to him. Do you think that kind of situation is possible? Father Martin's expression drooped into a concerned frown. There's quite a difference between miracles and the story of Job. I suppose I see what you're getting at, though. Job's suffering is in some way the antithesis to positive miracles. In this life, we are tested, sometimes to the point of losing everything. But even that person who has more reason to hate God than anyone else can once again find peace and eternal happiness through faith. In fact, it is often the person who is lowest in the pit of suffering that needs the light of Christ more than anyone else. I thought back on the first night that I prayed. It was in my moment of greatest helplessness that I reached out to God, and I thought I had found my answer in Him. But now, after what happened last night, after all these years of chaos, not merely losing things that were important to me, but my very sanity, I needed more than just blind faith. I couldn't just sit idly by and hope things would get better. I smiled at the priest and said, "Thank you, Father. This has been very insightful." "Of course, sister. I'm sorry if I couldn't have been more help." "No, I think I understand now. I've been wrestling with something, and I think God wants me to confront it. I think I've been running away and hiding from it for so long that I'd convinced myself it disappeared." Father Martin nodded in understanding. "Well, in that case, will you let me leave you with a prayer?" I was a bit taken off guard by the request, but I accepted. "Sure, Father." I watched as he made the sign of the cross, and then he lifted his hands and closed his eyes. Dear God, I am so happy that I had the privilege of meeting with Lauren today, especially on a day such as this where we are offering gifts to those who need them. You have heard her desire to confront the things that are troubling her. I ask that you bless her with strength and peace and a clear conscience, that she may overcome these challenges. God, bless us with your Spirit, that we may see your hand in our lives. Amen. Amen, I said. As I was leaving, Father Martin called out to me and said, "Oh, just so you know, this Friday at 7 we are having a barbecue at the parish center. I would love to see you there, if you are able and wanting." Turning back, I smiled and said, "Oh, okay. Thanks, Father. I'll think about it." The priest nodded, and with a smile, he sent me off. I walked into the deli at 1 o'clock on the dot. The customers who had arrived for the lunch rush were already cleaning up their trash and heading out. I dodged past a few of them on my way down the long, narrow path leading to the front counter. After I waited behind a couple of elderly folk who were picking which soup they wanted to pair with their ultimate grilled cheese, I looked around for Trent. He hadn't sent me a picture or any way of contacting him throughout the day, so I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I figured I'd see some man half hidden behind a newspaper scouting me out. Maybe I watched too many movies, I thought. "Ma'am, you're up," croaked the teenager behind the register. "Oh, right, sorry," I replied, and stepped up to the counter. I muttered, scanning the menu for something that looked edible. "Could I just get—" I made sure to mouth every syllable as they were words of their own. "We have a deal. The try-two combo. A sandwich and a soup for $9.99. The cashier repeated for what was probably the 50th time that day. Yes, that sounds good. I'll do the Italian sandwich and a potato soup. And a drink, please." After I paid for the food, I wandered around the tables, hoping to find someone who looked like a Trent. I was picturing a short guy, runner's build, with long brown hair, tucked somewhere neatly away in the corner. So I was not prepared when the Hulk's stunt double growled my name from a table smack dab in the middle of the restaurant. "Lauren." He had a pale, square face that was spotted with freckles and a sinking property that came with the lethal combination of stress and age. His hair was relatively short. Probably it was brown auburn, but since it was slicked back, it looked almost black. And he wore what looked like janitor coveralls. There was even a cloth tag pinned to his chest which read, "Trent. Lauren." He repeated. "Yes, that's me," I said, and took a seat across from him. When I saw a brown tray on the table in front of him, and on the tray was a large, white soup bowl. It was empty and beginning to crust along the edges. He must have been here for some time already. I didn't know where you'd be, so I was worried we might have missed each other. I'm glad you found me, though, I said while looking over Trent more thoroughly. His large hands were stretched out in front of him on the table. He wasn't wearing a ring, so he probably wasn't married. And his face, it was stern. He seemed like a no-bullshit kind of guy. And I saw his eyes. They were sapphire blue. Probably the most stunning I'd ever seen. We only spoke on the internet, so I hope you don't mind, but I usually run a preliminary test on anyone I meet who claims to have abilities such as yours, Trent said, while reaching into his pocket and removing a device that had the size and shape of an electric razor. All you have to do is look into it. It takes maybe 5 seconds, 10 at most. Sure, I said reluctantly. Do I just... I asked while reaching for the device. Trent clicked the button and released a cylindrical head which opened, revealing a glass circle about the size of an iris. I'll hold it. You just look into the center. A red cross should appear. Then it'll take a picture. Okay, I replied, and I did as he instructed, leaning my head forward to look into the device. Sure enough, the red cross appeared. Is it... was all I got before the light turned blue, and I saw a gray fog disperse and billow throughout the inside of the tube, extending for what I perceived to be miles. My jaw went slack and I couldn't breathe for maybe 5 seconds. Then Trent reshuttered the device and turned it over. Damn, 72, he said with a hint of shock. That's the highest I've scanned to date. He looked back at me, more relaxed now, and muttered to himself, How have you been able to function for this long? At this level, you should basically be half in, half out. I rubbed my forehead, feeling a mixture of pain and frustration and fatigue and impatience, which all poured out at once. Listen, Trent, I said as sternly as I could. I came here because you said you knew what was wrong with me and that you could help me. I get that you have to make sure I am who I said I am, but now it's your turn to pay up. How do I know you know anything about my condition? You said my mom might still be alive. What does that even mean? I saw her die right in front of me. I want answers. I waited for Trent to respond, but he only lifted his head. I turned around and saw a girl holding a tray of food. Hi, sorry to interrupt. I have an order 36 for Lauren. Oh, yes, thank you, I said. The worker placed the tray down on the table in front of me, and when I saw the food, I suddenly realized how hungry I was. Trent must have also realized this because he folded his arms and said, Go ahead and eat. I'll explain while you do. I wanted to protest, but my salivating mouth made other plans. Fine, I said. I grabbed the metal spoon off of the tray and started on the soup, bracing against the steaming heat of the potato chunks. As I ate, Trent moved all the items on his tray off to the side, and then he flipped the tray over so it raised slightly off the table. He took his cup and placed it face down on the center, and then he rolled up a few of his used blue mayonnaise packets and charted a track across the tray. What are you doing? I croaked out between bites. Trent ignored me and continued by ripping up a napkin into strips and placing them alongside the mayonnaise packets. Finally, he snapped 10 toothpicks in half and stuck them into the tomb of a dozen overlaid napkins. It's a diorama, he said at last. It's my... what? From the story you sent me, your diorama. When I read about it, it gave me a good idea of how to explain the... blinking. I pointed at the cup in the center. Is that supposed to be a pyramid? Because I'm pretty sure you're in the wrong geometric neighborhood with that one. It's an analogy, he said. Of an analogy, I quipped back. Look, he picked out one of the toothpicks and held it out in front of me. This could be a person, an animal, a crowbar, whatever you want. The point is, this diorama is a stand-in for our universe. This is everything that exists, what we can see, okay? Okay. Now, me. Trent placed a hand over his heart. I am not in the diorama. I do not exist in the universe. In the universe where a cup is a pyramid, or the actual universe? I said, unable to control myself. Trent grimaced. Sorry, keep going, I get it. Things pop into. Trent threw the toothpick back onto the tray. Or out of. And he picked the toothpick back up. Of our universe. At will, based on forces. He patted his chest again. That exist in other realms. he gestured to the room, that are connected to our universe. He tapped 2 fingers against the tray. These things could be objects, like, say, a toothpick, or entities, like the one you encountered yesterday. The blinking experience that you described aligns with the typical experience of a modern antenna. That's what I call people like us, antennas, because we can pick up on the signals others can't. We? You mean you see the blinking too? Yes, but not to the same extent as you. If all the blinks are gathered in a giant picture that you can see, I'm traversing the image through the binoculars, maybe even a microscope, depending on where we are. I thought about this. I guess it was possible that there were other people like me out there. But since I'd never met anyone, I didn't really consider the idea until now. And then for him to say my ability was somehow much stronger than his. But, I started, I haven't even seen that many blinks since I was a child. It's just more focused and malicious now. Yeah, Trent scratched his head. That's the thing that got me really interested in you. Somehow, you seem to be able to control it without gear, just by praying. And look, that's all well and good, but I don't want to give you the false impression that I'm some kind of religious leader. I like to look for logical, scientific explanations for things. So that's the frame I'm coming at this from. I took a sip of my drink. That's fine, I said. The truth is that's why I reached out to you in the first place. I wanted an explanation I could understand. An explanation that was directly related to what I'm going through. I was scooping out the last potato that was stubbornly gliding along the bottom of the bowl when, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the old man from the line shooting up from his bench and standing in army erect form. I felt a tingling sensation tickle the back of my neck. I didn't want to turn towards him. I knew what I'd see if I did. Trent, I whispered, trying to tip him off. He grunted, and then when he saw my expression, he snuck his right hand under the table and said, Do you see it? Is it here? I cocked my head to the left, signaling towards the old man that was now facing us, but Trent didn't seem to notice him. His eyes kept scanning the entire front of the restaurant. Then I saw the old man take a step in our direction. Lauren. Oh, Lauren. I've been looking for you, Lauren. The old man said in a low, gravelly voice that gave the impression he was gargling liquid tar. I turned and saw his face, and it was cold and expressionless, and a butter knife was poking out of his left fist. When I met his eyes, he smiled that horrible smile. You're a slippery little bitch. You know that. He spat. Why can't you just stay put? Don't you get tired of running from your old friend? Or have you forgotten about me? Trent, I mumbled out. Right there. And this guy, you think he can help you? He's only here to help himself. If that's not clear, you really are a lost little lamb. Give me your hand, Trent instructed. I was silent, my eyes still pinned on the old man. Tisk, tisk, tisk. The demon-possessed senior wagged his finger at me, taking a step, and then another step, shortening the distance as much as he could while I was entranced. Then, suddenly, he sprinted forward at a speed that shouldn't have been even possible for a man his age. Trent! I screamed. Lauren, give me your hand! I spun around and grabbed Trent's outstretched arm, just as the old man lifted the butter knife over his head like a pickaxe. Then I saw Trent pull out what looked like an old toy gun from under the table and point it at the demon. "Gotcha," Trent remarked. I braced for a gunshot, but there was no noise. After a couple seconds, I looked back and saw the old man was sitting at the booth opposite his wife, his hand tremoring as he reached for the large drink. "What did you?" I asked, but Trent was already pulling me out of my seat. "Come on, we have to go," he said. "The effect is temporary. He'll be..." But before he could get out the last word, I saw the cup pyramid on Trent's tray blink out of existence. The sound of a plate shattering rang out from the table up ahead. The lone woman standing there slowly turned around, smiling, with a fork in one hand and a piece of the broken plate in another. Trent shot her with the toy gun as we ran past, and then barreled through the front door. "Where are we going?" I asked between gasps. "My van. It's loaded with kit." "And then where?" "Your house." Your house," replied Trent, who stashed his gun back in his pocket and then took out a key fob. "My house? But that's where it appeared." "Yeah, and that's where you banished it." Trent waved me into the passenger seat of his Ram 3500 ProMaster. I noticed right away that the dash looked more like it belonged in a new limited edition EV than a cargo van. The ignition kicked on automatically, and I heard the beep of a sonar ping precede an English woman's voice calling out like some oxed-in GPS saying, "Scanning for anomalies." Trent shifted the van into gear, and I heard the wheels sputter as we accelerated backwards and whipped out of the small parking lot. "What's your address?" Trent asked. I gave it to him, and then speaking to his dash, he said, "Car, take us to..." "Address." "Redirecting to..." "Address," replied the British woman. "Currently detecting 31 novel emergencies. Updating pings every 300 milliseconds. The van has sensor equipment which can detect blinks. It's much more accurate than either of us." "And it sees 31? "Yes. That's not as many as it sounds," Trent said, and tore past a car that blinked out of existence right as we turned onto the main street. We drove on for another couple minutes, the Englishwoman updating the number of novel emergencies every 10 seconds or so. Her constant babbling eventually became a comforting background noise, and I was able to think again. "In the message you sent me, you said my mom might still be alive." I looked at Trent to see if he would react to me bringing her up, but he remained stolid. "What did you mean by that?" Trent thumbed his steering wheel. "I shouldn't have sent that," he said at last. "Shouldn't have? What do you mean? You can't just say that now." Trent took one hand off the wheel and turned towards me. "Look, we're going back to your house because we need to determine your origin point. All antennas have them. It's a place of high energy where many realms intersect. Kind of like a station. It's a place where you first acquired your abilities. Based on everything you wrote, I'm guessing that place is in the forest where the accident happened when you were a young child. But I need to confirm it. Once I can confirm that's the place..." Trent hesitated. "Then... what? You want us to go back there? To the place where my mom died? Or at least where I think she died until you told me she might be alive, but now we're taking it back? That place?" "It's the only way to..." "Now detecting novel agent," the Englishwoman interrupted. We both perked up as she gave another update. "Net anomalies, 437. Novel agents, 1. Chance of contact, 78%. "Shit," Trent muttered. "Car, course correct." "Attempting course correct to avoid collision. Attempts made, 10, 50, 75, 79. No alternate route detected. Chance of contact, 96%. "Time until contact?" "Time until contact, 13 seconds." I shuddered. Looking out the front windshield, I saw cars pop out of existence left and right, opening up a clear path to the four-way intersection ahead. In a blink, the streetlights all turned green, and then they vanished completely. It was as if the entire world was being stripped down bare, and all that remained was the road, boxed in by rows of buildings along either side. In the distance, I could see a large tanker barreling towards us. "Trent." "I know," he replied, and clicked a different button on the console which opened a new toggle for the shifter labeled TD. He pushed the stick forward, engaging a new mode, and then pressed the accelerator all the way down to the ground. You're gonna want to hold on. What are you doing? I yelled, grabbing onto my seatbelt. No time to explain. Car. Release phase lock. Phase lock. Released. I watched in horror as the color drained from the road, the buildings, the sky, transforming it all into a dim tunnel, with only the headlights of the oncoming semi-truck visible up ahead. I had the sudden thought that this was all a dream, just like the ones from my childhood. I looked over and no longer saw Trent, but my mother. And then I realized this wasn't a dream. This was hell. I was being forced to relive the worst moment of my life, over and over again. Just when I thought I had escaped, I was pulled right back into that car, helpless as we approached, but never arrived at our impending fate. I closed my eyes, right as the lights engulfed the windshield, and braced for the usual pain in my chest, for the feeling of braking. But it didn't come. Shift was the last word out of Trent's mouth. And then I was infused with the sensation of being at the pinnacle of a roller coaster. I was suspended there for what felt like hours, but somehow I knew that not even a second had passed. Everything inside the van, the dashboard, windows, ceiling, doors, even Trent himself began to radiate enigmatic particles. They were a mass of constant motion, like raindrops falling through the air but never landing. I looked down at my hand, but it was gone, diffused into an unknowable number of untraceable particles. The world outside, once devoid of color, was now nothing but color. When I tried to focus on a particular spot in the infinite geometric folds of whatever realm we were traversing through, I could sometimes detect a trace of our world. The old lady from the church, she appeared as if through a window, standing behind a table, holding out a plant. Only this image was much brighter, and the plant she was holding was pure gold. Then I'd catch a glimpse of the razor blade. It was large, many hundreds of times larger than the van, and surrounded by darkness. These ghastly images appeared like holograms or reflections that caught the light at just the right angle, and then dissipated. I stayed there, looping between the archetypes of my life for a long, long time. I knew we were returning when I felt the first sense of motion. Breath filled my lungs for the first time in what felt like a day. I blinked, and then we were back in town, driving down the same road with the blue sky above. People were jogging on the sidewalk, past the little street shops. The street lights were active. I checked the side mirror and saw the tinker had just passed by. I looked over at Trent, who met my eyes. We shared a look of knowing and unknowing. For some reason, that was enough. We continued on in silence. We agreed to stay the night at my house. Trent had parked a couple blocks away in front of a couple vacant houses, so as to not arouse suspicion from the neighbors. Then he lugged a large duffel bag with his equipment in and set up in the living room. He scanned the scrapbook, which contained the newspaper clippings from the accident several times, and confirmed that it was likely my origin point. I simply nodded and then went back onto the back porch. I sat there for hours, basking in the sun. Something had changed in the past day, but I couldn't pick out what it was. Too much had happened. Too little time to process any of it. When the sun set, I went inside and Trent told me about his plans for the next couple of days. He said he needed to run a few errands in the morning and then meet up with a couple of his associates. After that, we could begin our drive to southern Illinois. He said it was likely that the entity that was chasing me had first tied itself to me during my childhood accident. For whatever reason, we came into contact, and now it didn't want to leave. Trent would help me get rid of it. He didn't go into many details regarding how that was going to happen. But I don't think in my tired state I would have been able to understand much anyway. He had a plan. That was enough for me. At least for a while. After our meeting, I made sure that Trent had enough pillows and blankets like a proper host, and then I retired to my room. I laid down on my twin bed and stared up at the cream-colored ceiling. Then I turned and saw the participation awards for my junior soccer league stashed in my dresser. I pictured myself on the field, running with the ball, out ahead of everyone except the goalie, I took a shot, but it was blocked. Then I ran back to defend. How can such a simple game be so much fun? Was the last thought I had before drifting off to sleep. I woke up only once during the night. It was still dark out. The room was warm despite the small, flower petal fan churning away, shifting the hot, humid air from one pocket of the room to the next. I waited in apprehension, sensing that something had disturbed me. I saw the tomato plushie peeking out at me from the slightly ajar closet door where I had stashed it so many years ago. I felt like I was missing something important. Then I heard it. There was a tapping at my window. Darkness gave way to dimness as I opened my eyes and saw slivers of gray light printed on the ceiling like lines on the page of a ruled notebook. In the distance, I heard the sound of pans clanking against the kitchen stove, and I became ever aware of the scent of cinnamon and bacon sneaking in from under the closed bedroom door. For a moment, I was back in 6th grade. My dad was downstairs cooking up his famous from-scratch buttermilk pancakes and cheesy scrambled eggs. It was probably 7 o'clock, maybe 7:05, and I had 15 minutes to get up, shower, dress, eat, and then get off to middle school with my dad, for me to learn, and for him to work. It was the day we were set to be assigned our ancient civilization project. Unless something went terribly wrong, I would be choosing ancient Rome. I didn't know much about it, other than it was some great empire. But even then, I didn't really understand what an empire was. I was just happy that I would get to build something with my dad. I turned on my side and looked at the closed blinds, the source of the gray lines, and then the cabinet with all of my trophies. And finally, the wobbly fire truck red chair pushed under my desk. I was at home at last. The past 15 years were nothing but a dream. There was no blinking, no malevolent demon chasing me, no inexplicable chaos. It was a sweet fantasy, but one that became bitter the longer I tried to chew on it. I swept my legs out from under the covers and sat, face down, on the corner of my twin mattress. My feet were adults' feet. My room was my former room, and that was Trent downstairs cooking breakfast. Unless, of course, it was my dad, in which case I'd have bigger issues than just waking up from a good dream. After changing into a fresh shirt and pants, I went downstairs and saw that it was, in fact, Trent cooking breakfast. He was wearing a plain t-shirt through which I could see his rippling large back muscles as he whisked what I presumed was pancake batter. He must not have heard me, because he didn't turn around when I made it to the end of the hall. I leaned against the wall, arms folded, and watched him for a minute as he finished whisking the batter, and then poured it onto the hot griddle, spilling a few dribbles on the counter in the process, watching it bubble, flipping it, and then transferring the golden medallion onto a plate stacked 5 high. To the pancakes was a plate filled with bacon, and a small aluminum pan of scrambled eggs. "Smells good," I said at last. "Find everything okay?" I thought I might startle him with my abrupt appearance. Instead, Trent looked over his shoulder, chewing on a piece of bacon. He swallowed it and said, "Oh, it's you. I hope you don't mind. I woke up early, wanted to make us some breakfast." It occurred to me that Trent likely wasn't a guest in people's homes very often. Lucky for him, that hadn't been mine in years. I was going to tell him as much when I saw an open box of Bisquick sitting on the counter. I pointed to it and asked, "You found that in the pantry? My dad normally makes his from scratch." He turned to look at the box and then back at me. "Oh, no, I went out and got that, along with the bacon and eggs. I didn't want to dig into your supply, and you were asleep, so I couldn't ask." I felt my eyebrows furrow as I checked the time on the stove clock. It's 8:17 in the morning. Are you telling me you went out to the store, bought all these ingredients, and then came back and cooked them? Just how early did you get up? Around 5. As if I had asked his dog's name. I don't usually get much sleep. Around 4, 5 hours is all I need. It's actually pretty unusual for us antennas to need more. But I suppose you are pretty unusual. I opened my mouth in disbelief. Not only had he commandeered my kitchen, he was calling me unusual? At 8:17 in the morning? "Sorry," Trent said, reading my expression. Well, let's just say I've not had many personal relationships. I'm used to being blunt. It's just easier that way." He took out a plate and transferred 2 pancakes, some eggs, and a few slices of bacon onto it, and then he held it up to me as a peace offering. I sighed. "This better be good," I said with a wry smile, and took the plate. "Trent certified. No guarantees. Refunds not allowed, he replied, which made me giggle. We sat across from one another at the dining room table. The meal was pretty good, but it was no dad's special. The pancakes were clearly box pancakes. The scrambled eggs lacked the cheese and had a little too much pepper. The bacon was... Oh, it was bacon. No complaints here. Still, it was nice to settle down and have a somewhat normal morning. After we ate, Trent unfurled the long arc of his life, which began as the second youngest brother of 8 siblings in rural Oklahoma. Trent's pops was in the logging business, first as a lumberjack, and then as an owner of his own logging company. His dad acquired the business while Trent was still young, so school was never a priority for him, at least not in the way contributing to the household was. The rest of his childhood is summed up in 2 lessons. Being close has nothing to do with distance, and don't touch strange plants in the woods. I asked him if he kept in touch with any of his siblings, to which he responded saying, "The only reason they haven't had a funeral for me is because it would be too much work." When I asked him to elaborate, he said he'd not had contact with anyone in his immediate family for over a decade. He kept tabs on them. For example, he knew his mother had dementia, and his dad was forced into retirement by his oldest brother, who had gone on to take over the logging company. His sisters were all married and moved to other parts of the country. He considered reaching out several times. Situation required a degree of security that wasn't conductive of close family ties. Not that there were particularly strong ties even before he broke contact. Trent admitted to being a bit of a black sheep. It all circles back around to one of my jobs as a home inspector, he explained. After I moved out, I tried college, quickly realized it wasn't for me. So I entered into the workforce and did a bunch of odd jobs. Construction, carpentry, plumbing. I even did garbage truck for a while, but I ended up in home inspection. There was one job in particular which made me aware of... Trent paused and gestured toward the space between us. Our situation. The blinks. Do you remember what I told you about the origin points being like a station where the other realms intersect with our world? Well, and this house was like the Union Station or JFK Airport, if you prefer a plane analogy. There was a pile of junk up to my knees in the basement of that house. All of it had been blinked in. I spent a couple days on the property running tests, trying to identify the strange phenomena, but on day 3, I rolled up to an army of what I thought, at the time, were feds, parading around the property like ants on an anthill and sectioning it off with crime scene tape. I saw disgust funnel into Trent's expression. They're not feds at all, though. At least not anymore. I call them the organization, a group of people who let in the formalized understanding of what you know as blinking. And they're the reason I have to take precautions. I considered this for a moment. Trent's story was certainly plausible, but I was missing a key piece of the puzzle. Okay, so what does this organization want? You make it seem like they're not good people. Have they tried attacking you? This caused Trent to laugh for a solid 10 seconds. Sorry, it's just... I mean, if you knew what I knew, you might think it's funny too. Then tell me. Trent took a deep breath and then released. It's a long story. The gist of it is this. The organization has a certain device which I call the receiver. You think of it like a giant antenna. No, not us kind of antennas. An actual antenna. And like the machine, it's like the machine equivalent of us, but with 1 billion times the bandwidth. Their goal is to use the receiver to map out our world in relation to other dimensions, and then use that map to establish dominion over everyone and everything. In order to do this, they need muscle, both human muscle and antenna muscle. They're in the process of harvesting as many of us as they can find. They're like a giant diamond company who are taken into the mines. When they find a stone, they take it back to their factory for cutting and refinement. In real terms, they run tests on us in an attempt to augment our powers. The power goal is to create a stronger antenna or an antenna capable of causing phase shifts, blinks. Trent saw from my expression that he was starting to lose me, so he stood up and began rolling up his shirt. What are you doing? I asked, turning away. Then I saw what he wanted to show me. There was a long scar running high up his ribs and slashing all the way down his left hip. There was also what appeared to be a patch of burn marks on his stomach. It was early on when I got these, he explained. I was naive. I actually thought I'd be able to reason with these people. The only reason I escaped was because of dumb luck and a box of hand grenades. I learned 2 important lessons that day. First, the organization isn't fucking around. 2, they aren't immortal. Most of them are regular, everyday humans, except for their obsession with power. Trent let his shirt fall, covering up the marks. I ran into them again recently at their headquarters. My team and I are working on a plan to... He paused, seemingly weighing his words, then changed gears. Well, I guess we can go over that another time. I couldn't help but feel like Trent was holding something back. As much as I tried to resist thinking about yesterday, the old demon man's words kept ringing in my head. Then I thought about what Trent said at the deli. That's the thing that's got me really interested in you. Somehow, you seem to be able to control it without gear, just by praying. Now, did Trent think I was a strong antenna? Is that the only reason that he's helping me? Because he wants to recruit me? If that's the case, what if I said no? Listen, Trent, I started, but I saw Trent was already nodding, and still I pressed on. I need you to tell me what I'm actually doing here. Why did you agree to help me, and what does helping me really mean? I want to know the truth. Well, the truth is... Trent started, and then stopped, and looked out the glass door that led onto the back deck. I looked too, and saw a sparrow had alighted on our old bird feeder. It tried pecking at some of the non-existent grains, and then sang what I assumed was a song of displeasure before taking back off to the skies. The truth is, I do want to recruit you. I think you have the potential to be the strongest tool in my arsenal, but I won't require it. To date, I've helped 53 of our kind, but only 7 have stayed on. Most decide to go on and live normal lives. Trent scooted his plate closer to the side. In our case, this can essentially go one of 2 ways. In either instance, we pass through Chicago for 2 stops. First, I need to meet up with an associate who has something to drop off to me. Then I need to stop at a storage locker and trade out some gear that will allow me to open the phase portal. When we arrive at your origin point, I'll open up the phase portal and you'll look inside. Based on everything you told me, I'm guessing that childhood accident was when the demon appended itself to your life, but seeing how it entered your life, you should be able to figure out how to dispel it. At least that's the working theory. Returning to the origin point has always worked for the other antennas, although I must admit that your situation is different, but I can't imagine it's so different that this method won't work at all. After you return demon-free, you're free. You can walk out and never see me again, and hopefully you'll live a happy and peaceful life. Or you can decide to throw your lot in with mine, and I can show you how deep the rabbit hole really goes, so to speak. Trent looked into my eyes, and when I didn't respond for a few seconds, he said, "That's it. That's all I got." I smiled and responded with one sentence. "When do we leave?" Memories have a strange architecture. In some ways, they are a great safety net for our experiences, collecting them like a bucket under a leaky roof. But in other ways, they're like an eternal reminder that nothing ever truly lasts. Perhaps a better way of thinking about memories is as the ghosts of our past, lingering in the present. As I took one last stroll through my childhood house, feeling that it might be my last chance for a long while, I felt the imprints of childhood memories press into my awareness. I could hear my father's voice reading to me at my bedside. I could see him holding one of my stuffed animals above my head as I wrestled him for it. I also recalled the times when I'd sneak down the stairs late at night, quietly open the freezer, grab the ice cream carton, and then head back upstairs to eat it. I felt a yearning to return to those memories, to walk into the fictitious pictures my mind was painting on the canvas of my present. I knew I couldn't return, but I still wanted something to hold on to. I went back to my room and grabbed the cotton stuffed tomato from off of my closet cabinet. Then I walked through my dad's study and removed a volume I recalled him frequently reading, a hardcover book with a green binding called A Collection of Great Works. I placed these items by my feet in the passenger seat of Trent's van, and just as we were about to leave, I remembered something else. "My plant!" I blurted out. "Your what?" My plant! And my car. I left them at the deli. Do you think we could swing by there and get it?" Trent checked the time, then said, Yeah, I guess we can. I hope it isn't towed." Luckily, it wasn't. I half expected to find a ticket on the windshield, but there wasn't one of those either. I unlocked the door to my Jetta, and I got into what felt like an actual oven. Hot, I said, and rolled down all the windows, and then cranked up the AC. I saw my plant resting in the cup holder that I'd left it in the previous day. I picked it up and touched its soil. It was dry and beginning to crack. Hang on, little guy, I thought, and then I led the way back to my house. When I arrived, I parked in the head of the driveway, turned off the car, and then ran inside with the young tomato plant, bringing it to the upstairs bathroom sink and dousing it in water. I wasn't sure how much I was supposed to add, but I figured after the sauna experience it had yesterday, I could afford to go a little overboard. And once it was fed, I opened the small purple drapes and placed it in the windowsill which faced east, meaning it would hopefully get plenty of morning sunlight. Good now? Trent asked as I hopped back in the passenger seat of his van. Yeah, I said. Good now. Let's get a move on. Road tripping with Trent was a much different experience than when we were driving for our lives. For one, Trent wasn't nearly as tense. He drove with the windows down and one hand on the steering wheel like out of a Mustang commercial, talking intermittently about his adventures, people he'd met, jobs he'd done, close calls. He was like a living radio. And when his personal station wasn't on, he was playing one of his CDs, classic rock, mainly. When he was in an off period, I found myself looking out the window at the rolling wheat fields and the cloudy blue sky. Journey was playing, and the lyrics to one of the songs crept into my head and reverberated there. The wheel in the sky keeps on turning. I don't know where I'll be tomorrow. I've been trying to make it home. Gotta make it before too long. Oh, I can't take it very much longer. In a strange way, I felt like I was leaving home. But in another way, I was going back. And then it occurred to me that perhaps I didn't have a home at all. Did I ever have one? These past couple of days had called everything about my life into question, to the point where the past seemed as mysterious as the future, and both intersected at the one place in the woods, the place where it all began, the place where we were headed. We only stopped once at a gas station to refuel, get snacks, and use the bathroom. Otherwise, it was smooth sailing. Well, other than the one heated discussion with Trent that began when he addressed his vehicle as car for the 5th time. Okay, you need to come up with a better name than that. What do you mean? Trent asked, seeming genuinely confused. You have a supercar, and you named it Car. That's actually embarrassing. But it is a car. I facepalmed. First of all, it's a van. A van is a type of car. Second of all, would you name your kid Kid? Trent thought it over for what I thought was much too long. At last he concluded, no, I'd probably name him Boy, or if it's a girl, Girl. After 5 more minutes of his childish banter, we settled on the name Ava, my choice, after rejecting his runner-up name, Scar. At around the 7-hour mark, I dozed off, then woke up a couple hours later to the sensation of the van dipping, then bumping up into an elevated climb. The evening sunlight that was pressuring my eyelids to open dissipated, and everything was suddenly dark. I opened my eyes and saw we had entered a parking garage. Trent pulled into an open spot on the 2nd level. We're here, he said, and gathered up his gun, which he'd stashed in the driver's side underboard compartment that I'm guessing he had installed himself. I see that. You want to wait here, or... I opened the car door, which was an answer enough for Trent. We both got out and started down Maple Avenue. I'd been to several cities before, Chicago among them, but the size of the buildings always struck me with awe. As we walked alongside dozens of other pedestrians, I looked up and traced the closest tower to its peak, guessing how many stories it was in my head. Then I'd be pulled out of my game by the honking of some nearby vehicle. We continued for 2 blocks until Trent made a path directly towards the nearest Starbucks. I didn't know what I was picturing for a meeting with his associate, but it definitely wasn't a meetup at a coffee shop. But still, I followed him in. And then, when I saw that Trent was leading me to the corner table where a casually dressed Chinese girl who appeared even younger than me was sitting, I blurted out in a hushed tone, Her? She's your associate? Took you long enough, said the Chinese girl, looking up from what appeared to be some kind of homework assignment. And she's in school? I asked, incredulous. The associate looked to me, and then to Trent, who nodded, and then back to me. It's just a cover. I'm glad to see it still works, though. She reached out to shake my hand. "I'm Allison. Nice to meet you." Trent gave me a smirk, and then said, "Looks can be deceiving." I grunted an affirmation, and shook Allison's hand. "I'm Lauren. It's nice to meet you. You have it?" Trent asked, skipping right to business. "Of course I have it," Allison replied, and removed a mailing packet from her backpack, setting it on the table. "You want to go make sure it works?" she asked, gesturing up to the ceiling with her eyes. Trent seemed to think it over for a second, then looked at me. But before he could say anything, Allison cut back in. "I'll stay here with her. It's been a while since I've had any female company. Why don't you let us girls talk while you take care of that?" she said in a seductive yet authoritative tone which garnered her years that her appearance did not reflect. Trent hesitated, but only for a moment. "Okay, I'll be right back," he said, and then hurried out the door in the direction that we had come from. "Come, sit with me," Allison invited. "Tell me about yourself." I took a seat on the small wooden seat opposite Allison, and then crossed my legs. "Oh, what do you want to know?" I asked, feeling discomfort rise in my stomach. Nothing about this situation, from the mysterious package, to Trent leaving me alone with this girl, to the girl herself, whose voice was as velvety smooth as the latte she was stirring with a black coffee straw, sat right with me. "Look, sure. I'm curious about what you think of Trent." "Trent?" I repeated. I realized this was the first time I was putting any of my thoughts about Trent or our relationship into words. I guess he's a pretty straightforward guy. He seems to know what he's doing." Allison flashed me a small smile, then took a sip of her latte. I saw the sticker from her drink red chai. Then she set the cup down and sighed. Yes. He's very straightforward. Definitely doesn't mince words." She looked up into my eyes. Hers were rich black, like onyx pebbles, but there was something about the way the light refracted off of them which simulated a kind of inward motion, as if there were tiny whirlpools. Her smile spread across her lips. "I'm curious. What did he tell you?" Tell me about what? About what you're doing? About where you're off to? What's the plan?" "You don't know?" I asked, but it immediately occurred to me that maybe she didn't know. I never saw Trent with a cell phone. Just how did he communicate with his associates? And what if he didn't want her to know what we were doing for a good reason? Should I tell her? "No. Trent keeps his cards close to his chest. He always has." "Don't you work together, though?" Allison waved her left hand in the air. "Of course. But it's because of the nature of our work that most of our communication is done in person. So Trent doesn't tell me much outside of the current job. I was just curious is all." "That makes sense. I mean, I'm actually pretty curious about what you do, too." "Oh?" Allison's voice went high, as if she suddenly sensed an opening. "Then why don't we trade stories? You tell me about your trip, I'll tell you about mine." I thought it over for a second. I really did want to hear what Allison had to say, and she was Trent's co-worker. It's not like I was spilling crucial secrets to an enemy. "Oh, we're currently on our way to Southern Illinois. Specifically, we're going back to my origin point so I can confront a demon that Trent thinks blinked into my life there." Allison stopped stirring, but her eyes didn't break mine. "A demon, huh?" She raised the cup and then took a long sip, and then placed it back on the table and continued stirring. "I met a demon once," she started, looking up at the walls as if her life was playing on a screen there. "It was back in China, where I was born." She dropped her attention back to me. "Do you mind if I reminisce a little? Maybe you can get something out of it." I shook my head, but something in my gut started to stir again. Allison continued. "I was born during the era of the one-child policy. As a result, my mother decided to leave me in a shoebox on the side of the road. I was a girl, so that's just how it was. Like many other babies in my condition, I ended up in foster care. However, for whatever reason, I wasn't adopted. Years passed, and when I turned 6, the government decided I would be better used building our impoverished town's GDP in a factory that assembled electronic devices for Western countries. Mostly they had me cleaning, but when I turned 8, one of the employees asked me for my help with one of the soldering machines. It turned out to be the beginning of the end for me. I sliced open the ring finger of my right hand. I remember specifically seeing the bone underneath the split flesh and thinking it looked so small and white. The employee claimed to have nothing to do with my accident, and the management declared my injury minimally invasive and closed it up. 2 weeks later, and who would have guessed that the wound would become infected And well, Allison dropped the straw into her cup and raised her right hand, spreading the fingers out for me to see. And there were only 4. Her ring finger was missing, and a small V-shaped scar had taken its place. I'm lucky the surgeon was experienced enough to take out the whole digit. That way it healed in a way which makes it somewhat difficult to notice. No, you didn't notice after all. But then again, is that really luck? She made a fist and brought it to her lips, stifling a cough. No, now I remember. My luck was still yet to come. She continued stirring. Because you see, after that incident, they moved me to a clothing factory with a boss who had a penchant for getting drunk and roughing up his workers. Well, one night I was walking back to foster care when I heard the outside door to my manager's office slam shut, and there he went, stumbling and slurring insults, curses. And here I was, perfectly in his path. We met eyes, and in them I saw absolutely nothing. A hollow shell of a man. I can still remember what it looked like to see the shell fill with a demon. Allison's eyes went wide with some strong emotion that I couldn't place. He grabbed me by my hair and dragged me out into the field, far away from civilization. I tried to fight at first, but every time I tried to lunge away, I was only ripping a hole in my own scalp. It felt like flames were spewing from my head. My only respite was when the blood eventually cooled over the wound. By the time he had thrown me against the rock, I had already all but given up. When my head met the stone, I heard a pop. My grip on the world loosened. The man continued touching me, but it was as if I was disconnected now, floating somewhere above my own head. The gravity was beginning to reverse, causing me to float higher and higher, away from the horrible nightmare below. Allison paused for a moment, and I suddenly realized I was holding my breath. Then I saw the most bright light I'd ever seen. At the time, I thought it was either the sun or heaven or something like that. It was just too bright for this world. But then, after looking for a little longer, I noticed it was the shape of a person. It reached out towards me. I'd never been so quick to respond. When I touched it, I felt all my pain immediately dissipate, and I felt warm and peaceful. I was no longer in the sky. I was back in the field. When I looked around, the man was gone, vanished right out of existence. I didn't understand at the time, but that was my first experience with the shifts. All I knew then was that I was free, and I damn well wasn't going to waste that. I ran as far as I could, away from the factories, the foster home, the corrupt governments and corporations. I kept running until I arrived at a city that didn't know me, that didn't want to know me. And I liked it that way, because it's easier to live as a ghost than as a victim. Allison perked up, and when I turned around to see what for, I saw Trent entering back through the door. But you know what's interesting? Allison blurted out, her voice becoming quieter. Trent never took me back to confront my demon. Her voice became a whisper. In fact, I can't recall him ever taking any of us back. For a moment, the whole world became a still frame. Allison's clear, olive skin and dark eyes, made darker with eyeliner, her narrow nose, her small lips now coiling into a smile. My entire body was a hair trigger that only needed the slightest force to set it off. And when Trent placed his hand on my shoulder, I whirled around and narrowly missed a haymaker that swept just shy of Trent's face. Whoa, 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 he said and stepped back, palms up. It's just me. Is everything okay? I turned back to Allison, but she seemed different now. Her expression was benign, confused. Are you okay? She asked. We were just talking about where you were off to next, Allison said without a hint of pretense. Okay, well, chat time's over. It's time to go, Trent said and started guiding me towards the door. I turned back and saw Allison mouth some words which I swear I heard, as if they'd been directly transmitted to my brain. See you soon, she purred. The next leg of the trip passed mostly in silence. It was a little over an hour to the storage facility, which was located just south of Chicago. My heart was beating wildly in my chest as I pictured Allison's smile. I wanted to ask Trent if demons could possess antennas, if somehow one of us could become compromised. But then I remembered Allison's words and stopped myself, because I didn't know if I really could trust Trent. I tried to tell myself I could trust him, that it was Allison who was the liar. Her whole persona seemed fake at best, possessed at worst. But then, what if she was telling the truth? What if Trent was the enemy? He sensed my quietness and tried striking up a couple conversations, but I only gave one-word answers. Somehow our trust was so brittle that a single, well-placed sentence was enough to snap it. When he asked if everything was okay, I lied and said that I just had a headache and I needed more rest. So I leaned my head against the stuffed tomato and tried to sleep, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to. We arrived at the facility just as the sun was setting for the night. Trent pulled up to the self-service gate and scanned a card, which caused the automatic doors to swing open. We looped down a couple rows of the outdoor units until we came to number 48. "We're here," Trent prompted, but this time I didn't budge. I felt his eyes on me after he turned off the ignition. "Hey," he called. "Are you awake?" I was silent. I heard Trent quietly click open his door, and then close it the same way. I waited a few seconds and then turned my head and watched him from the driver's side mirror. He opened the storage locker and then walked inside and turned on a light. It occurred to me now how dimly lit this outdoor storage facility was. There was a weak overhead lantern peeking out every fourth garage like an anglerfish's lure, leaving a large portion of the road not hit by the light bubbles completely dark. I tried to plan my next move. I could leave Trent and run, but where would I go? Or I could stay and see Trent's plan through. There was a chance this was all an elaborate trap. Maybe Trent was working with the demon, or maybe he was the demon. But then why did he save me? Twice. Maybe he was actually a double agent for the organization, but he could easily have captured me by now, unless he needs me to go back to the origin point for a different reason. I considered everything I had learned up to this point. We live at the cross-section of different realms. These other realms interact with our world. Antennas, who are a very small minority of people, can see these interactions. The organization wants to harness our power and create a strong antenna to achieve some kind of global hegemony. I'm the closest thing to a strong antenna to date. Trent knows this. He's taking me back to my origin point, despite not taking the others back to theirs. Trent claims to want to fight the organization. The best way to fight the organization would be with a strong antenna. What if Trent was trying to make me into a strong antenna? I considered this chain of reasoning. It seemed very plausible, especially after Allison's cryptic message. Was she trying to warn me of this? But that smile, and the "see you soon." If she wasn't being possessed, why would she be seeing me soon? Suddenly my thoughts gave way like a broken dam as I heard the ping come from Ava's radar. I jumped, thinking that all of the electronics were turned off with the ignition, but when I looked at the circular sonar map, I saw a red dot had just emerged from the top right corner. I looked out the window in the direction of the ping, but I couldn't see anything heading down the road. 4 more dots appeared behind the first, and then they were approaching. I jumped out of the van and ran over to where Trent was hauling in a large cardboard crate into the back of the van. Trent! There's pings on the radar! A bunch of them!" He dropped the box next to 3 others, and I realized I had never seen inside the back of the van. It was filled with what looked like pneumatic tubes wired into circuits, and in the center was a tripod which was holding a very large, halo-shaped ring. "Ping?" Trent said. His face widened with shock as he realized what I meant. "Shit, how many?" 5, maybe more now? And they're getting closer." 5? He jumped out of the back and ran to the storage locker. I thought he was going to close the door, but I saw him hauling boxes back towards the van. I yelled at him. "What are you doing?" "I need to load this up for tomorrow. Here." He tossed me his keys. "Get it started." "Fuck, seriously?" Trent didn't respond, only kept shuffling the boxes into the van. I turned and ran to the door and hopped in the driver's seat. As I was turning the ignition, I saw the row of bushes that was just outside of the facility begin to rattle. The next sweep revealed a whole sea of pings. I rolled down the window and shouted Trent's name. "One more, that's all. Get in the passenger seat, I'll be there in a sec." I scooted over to the center console and waited, clutching at the bottom of my pant legs. Just as Trent slammed the rear door of the van shut, I saw the first figure emerge into the road ahead of us. It looked like some kind of large coyote. "Now detecting 53 controlled agents," Ava said, right as Trent jumped in and shut the driver's side door. "Net anomalies. 53. "Ava, increase radius to 5 miles," Trent instructed as he backed up all the way to the end of the lane and spun us around towards the gate. Just as we left, I saw the pack of coyotes stalking towards us, slow at first, and then in a dead sprint. Increasing radius, Ava responded. Increased. Recalculating. Recalculating. Complete. Now detecting. 451 controlled agents. Net anomalies. 451. What does controlled agent mean? I asked. Hold on, Trent said as he accelerated into the gate, bursting through it. The whole van shook and I heard my phone fall in the crack between the seat and the door. Trent steadied the van and then said, It means the things chasing us are being controlled by something that isn't detectable. Demon? That'd be my guess. But why can't Ava detect it? Trent switched to the right lane and then merged onto the Interstate South ramp, probably because it isn't trying to kill us. Then what? I looked back at the map and basically had my question answered. All 451 pings were coalesced in a semicircle on one side of the map. The side of the map that we had just come from. Is it trying to force us toward the crash site? It seems that way, Trent answered. Trent, pull over. Huh? Pull over, I yelled. He looked at me, eyes wide. Then he did as I had instructed and pulled off in the middle of the ramp. The red dot slowly closed in on our position, now detecting. Shut up, Ava, I said. I could feel my blood boiling. I am not going one step further until you tell me the truth. Why are we going to my origin point? What is your real motive? What do you mean? I already told you. I unlocked the passenger side door. Wait, Trent said as he reached out towards me. Just wait. There was a silence, except for the pings indicating that the beasts behind us had re-encroached on our position about 50 meters. Okay, I didn't tell you everything, but we don't have time now. I opened the door. Okay. I didn't tell you everything. It's true. I've never done this with anyone else. But the reason is because I never needed to. And if I told you what might happen, you would have refused it. Refused what? This, me, my help, Lauren. I'm trying to help you. But you have to understand. It's likely that neither of us are going to live past tomorrow. You're basically confronting a dark entity in a place where I can't protect you. And if you somehow do manage to kill it, you'll be coming back to the fight of your life. Because I don't have the power to hide you from the organization. They're going to show up, and they're going to take you. I really don't know how you've lasted as long as you have. Whatever protection you have had growing up, it's gone now. And I'm all you have. And in some twist of fate, you're all I have. Ava reactivated. Now detecting. 1,117. Controlled agents. Proximity till contact. 20 meters. Net anomalies. 1,117. I closed my door. But what if I still don't want to go through with it? Trent pointed at the screen. Then we die. Right here. Right now. Together. Because I'm 100% certain that if we don't go to that crash site, we are dead anyway. All of us. Another ping rolled through, and I checked the side view mirror and saw the swarming pack of dogs reach the van and bound around the rear wheels. I suddenly recalled the conversation I had with Father Martin and the conclusions I had drawn. Father, I've been wrestling with something. I think God wants me to confront it. I think I've been running away and hiding from it for so long that I'd convinced myself it disappeared. Go, I said, just as I felt the collision of the coyotes slamming their bodies against the side doors. Trent didn't waste any time and stepped on the gas. I watched as the coyotes diminished in the distance and the pings receded into the back of the map, never disappearing fully, but covering the flank of our retreat. A reminder lingering on the edge of our awareness that there's no turning back now. That one way or another, this was ending tomorrow. I'd either be dead or something else entirely. We pulled off the I-51 a little after midnight, stopping at a truck stop, which was crouched between the highway and a large forest. We waited in the van for 10 minutes or so. Trent had increased the sonar radius to its maximum of 30 miles a little over an hour ago. Somehow the red pings had kept up with us, holding a steady distance of around 20 miles. Considering we were averaging around 80 miles an hour, and a coyote's top speed is only around 40, we figured they'd been enhanced in some way. Either that, or they shapeshifted into something faster. Regardless, now that we had stopped,
We waited to see if the demon spawn would try and close the distance. Luckily, or unluckily, they didn't. They kept their 20-mile buffer, but we noticed they were beginning to spread out along the circumference of the boundary. We're close. They know that. So they're trying to trap us in, Trent said. Trying to? More like they have. We considered whether we should stay in the van and keep watch, but we figured that would do us little good. At their speed, they could be on us in 10 minutes, which means we would need to stay up all night and keep tabs on their positions. Trent offered to stay up, of course, but I shut him down. The demon doesn't want to kill us now. You said it yourself. Plus, we need our rest. If they come, they come. Trent didn't like it, but he acquiesced. The truck stop had all the essentials, a gas station and a mini mart with showers and an attached McDonald's, a large parking lot for truckers to idle and sleep, and even a section with lodging for those who wanted a more comfortable night's rest. I told Trent that he should take advantage of the showers, and after a little convincing, he agreed. While he was cleaning himself up, I patrolled the dingy, half-stocked aisles of the Daisy's Quick Mart. I probably would have been appalled by the quality of the store, had I actually been paying any attention to it whatsoever. But I wasn't. I was thinking hard about what awaited me tomorrow. During the drive, I had asked Trent why the demon would want us to return to the crash site. What did he mean that I would be confronting a dark entity in a place he couldn't help me? He seemed hesitant to answer, but my little stunt outside the storage facility seemed to have sufficiently motivated him. When I said I've never done this before, I meant it, Trent started. I've never done this exact thing before, meaning I've never projected someone into the past. So I'm time traveling? I asked. No, don't think of it like that. Trent paused, trying to come up with a good explanation. It's more like I'm opening up a window for you to look through, not a door. You're going to see the past, but you can't interact with the physicalities there. But that doesn't mean you can't interact with anything. There was a space of silence as Trent tried to let me work out his meaning for myself. I don't get it. Are you saying there's something that I can interact with? Like what? Then it hit me. The demon. The demon can interact with me? Meaning what? It can kill me? Meaning, I'm not exactly sure. You're gonna be in a kind of psychic space. If it does damage, it won't be to your body. It'll be to your mind. Or spirit. I don't know what the limits of the damage could be. I just don't have those answers. If you've never done this, how do you know any of this will work? Well, that's an easy one, Trent answered. Because it's been done to me. There was silence. Look, if I know anything, I know my tech. Don't doubt that this will work. It's my job to make sure it does. I just need you to be in the right mental for this. Just because it knows you're coming doesn't mean it automatically has the upper hand. It won't be able to see you unless you make contact with it first. In other words, you have to initiate contact. As long as you remain a spectator, should be okay. Trust me. Just don't make contact. I started pacing faster, fast enough to catch the attention of an overnight shift worker, a young man whose name I can't quite remember. I know it started with a J. Jake, maybe? Anyway, he asked if I was all right, to which I responded with the affirmative. He left me alone for another couple passes, but when I almost ran into one of the shelves, he stood up and said, I'm gonna have to ask you to stop running around. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I must have stared daggers at him, because he recoiled from my gaze. What's gotten into me? I thought, then steadying myself, I apologized. I looked around and grabbed the nearest edible-looking piece of merchandise, a bag of Swedish fish, and placed it down on the counter. Just this, please. The cashier rang me up. It was surprisingly cheap. Are you sure you're all right? The young man asked. He was tall with brown hair. He seemed tired. Maybe even more tired than me, but he also seemed kind. I smiled as best I could and said, No, I'm not. But there's not really anything you can do. Hell, and there might not be anything I can do. I furrowed my eyebrows at my own response, realizing that imminent death may have broke my verbal filter. On the other hand, the cashier did not seem surprised at all. Ah, I see. It's one of those problems, he responded. Well, hey, for what it's worth, You seem like one of the resilient ones. I think you'll be alright. I only smiled and nodded at his mildly cryptic comment. Looking back, the whole interaction was a bit strange, but I had way too much mental clutter to recognize that at the moment. I took my Swedish fish and walked through the anteroom, which led to a McDonald's. I found an open yellow booth that wasn't littered with crumpled straw sleeves and sat down, chomping mindlessly on my little red fish until Trent returned. When he arrived, he took my place, and I went over to shower. After we were both cleaned and fed, we returned to the van. The pings were still pushed safely outside of harm's way, but that didn't mean we were out of harm's way. Trent asked me if I wanted to sleep in the van, saying that it would be the safest place. I thought it over. He was right, obviously. The van was not only outfitted with weapons I couldn't even begin to understand, but it was also our escape. And it would be just as difficult, if not more difficult, to break into than the studio-style motel rooms with their wooden doors and big windows. Still, if this was going to be my last night on Earth, I wanted to sleep in a bed. A real bed. Trent understood and said he'd stay parked right outside my room for the night. After purchasing a key from the night attendant, I moseyed over to the cement walkways which connected the 20 or so rooms. Mine was room number 56, which I thought was a bit odd since, like I said, there were only 20 rooms. I lugged in my tomato plushie and Dad's old book and placed them on the queen mattress. I'll be right outside, Trent said after I collapsed onto the bed. Trent? I called out, stopping him halfway through the door. Yeah? All the blood in my body rushed to my face as I realized my unfiltered mouth almost reflexively said the word. Stay? I stared at Trent, my heart beating, my face hot. I considered asking him to sleep on the floor like my dad, but that would be childish and impolite. The alternative was to share my bed, or I could take the floor. I'll just be right outside, Trent said before my mind processed a solution. Come by if you need anything. I'll be up most of the night anyway. Okay, I replied in a faint voice. Trent shut the door. I sat atop the bed sheets and acquainted myself with the new living space. A feeling of regret closed over me as I considered that even sleeping on a car seat would have been better if it meant I didn't have to be alone. With a sigh, I turned on the bedside lamp and grabbed the book and stuffed tomato, using the tomato as a backrest as I slipped my legs under the covers and situated the book upright on my thighs. I cracked it open and I was immediately blasted with a puff of dusty old book scent. It was ripe at first, and I turned my head away to sneeze. But as I perused through the pages, the scent grew on me. It reminded me of my days growing up, when I'd step into my dad's study and read through one of the many volumes on cryptic topics, which were at least 2 college degrees above my Lexile range. I was only a couple minutes into browsing the collection of different scientific and philosophical works when I came upon a page which contained highlighted text. And this was unusual, as my dad would never mark up his books. He was a purist on that point. I rubbed my thumb over the yellow lines, and sure enough, it was highlighter. The highlighted text was part of a small book by Carl Jung called Synchronicity. There was a total of 3 pages that were marked, and they advanced like this. Page 5. The philosophical principle that underlines our conception of the natural law is causality. But if the connection between cause and effect turns out to be only statistically valid and relatively true, then the causal principle is only of relative use for explaining natural processes. That is, as much to say as the connection of events may, in certain circumstances, be other than causal, and require another principle of explanation. Page 19. There are events which are related to one another experimentally, and in this case, meaningfully, without there being any possibility of proving that this relation is a causal one, since the transmission exhibits none of the known properties of energy. A situation which does not yet exist and will only occur in the future could transmit itself as a phenomena of energy to a receiver in the present. Therefore, it cannot be a question of cause and effect, but of a falling together in time, a kind of simultaneity, a synchronicity. Page 22. A young woman I was treating had, at a critical moment, a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. While she was telling me this dream, I sat with my back to the closed window. Suddenly I heard a noise behind me, like a gentle tapping. I turned around and saw a flying insect knocking against the window pane from the outside, and I opened the window and I caught the creature in the air as it flew in. It was the nearest analogy of a golden scarab that one finds in our latitudes, a scarabide beetle, a common rose chafer, which, contrary to its usual habitats, had evidently felt an urge to get into a dark room at this particular moment. I flipped through the rest of the pages of the book, and there was no more highlighted text, but there was a message on the last page which read, Matthew 7:7-8. I'll meet you in the darkest place. He also included his typical smiley face, which had an ovular shape with 3 sprouts of hair, which I now realize kind of resembles my tomato plushie. It was my dad's writing, of course. But why? How? What did this mean? The motel had a Bible stashed away in the nightstand drawer. I got it out and looked up the verses, which read the following. Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For every one that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. I spent maybe an hour ruminating on all of this. The whole discourse on energy and causality and a falling together in time just seemed so right. It was clear that my dad definitely did know what I was going through, but for whatever reason, he made it seem like he was oblivious. Why had he hidden that from me? I felt like I was being pulled in 2 directions. On one hand, my dad loved me enough to leave me this note, maybe even knowing the exact moment I'd need it. But on the other hand, he had neglected my struggles throughout my entire childhood. He even lied at times. Was this really enough to make up for all of that? And then there was the section about the future transmitting energy to the past. I read back through the whole paragraph, and the original writer had meant to say this as something that wasn't possible. But my dad's highlighting made it seem like he wanted to flip the meaning. The future does affect the past. I thought about where I was heading, and I wondered if I would soon discover that for myself. Lastly, Dad's message. The Bible verse reminded me of the first time I prayed, how I reached out to God and received peace as an answer to my prayer. Now I feel like I'm actively seeking something, but I don't know yet what I'll find. And then there's knocking. At first that reminded me of the story with the beetle tapping on the window, but then I went back even deeper in my memory and dug out a monster tapping on my window, and the words my dad spoke to me in order to set my mind at ease. You're a superhero. Do you know what your greatest superpower is? Your greatest power is that you get to tell the monsters what to do. Because the monsters are only as strong as the stories you tell about them. So if you're ever scared, honey, just dream up a better story. I was crying into my stuffed tomato now. I felt like all the blinking pieces of my life were finally being pulled together in a complete puzzle. This was all by design. My entire life filled with so much chaos and confusion was actually preparing me for this moment. And my dad thought I had the tools and strength enough to get through it. I flipped through the book one more time, thinking maybe he had left some other hidden comment, some formula to defeat the demon and return home. But there was nothing. Only that one comment. I'll meet you in the darkest place. What's the darkest place, Dad? Is that where I'm going? Are you saying you'll be there too? With all those thoughts in my mind, my eyes became heavy shutters which, with the slightest pressure on the pulley, winded shut. My swimming thoughts and firework-like fears dissipated, and I returned to a precious childhood memory. It was after an evening soccer practice. Summer. Dad was driving me to Dairy Queen. I got a cherry-dipped twist cone. I was happy. So happy. I woke up to the sunlight blaring through my windows. Shit, I overslept, was my immediate thought. I threw off my covers and opened the front door. A glance at the clock showed 1:13 p.m. I shouldn't have even been allowed to stay checked in this long. Damn it. Am I going to be double billed for this? I heard a rummaging sound around the corner of my motel room. It sounded like a squirrel was trying to find an afternoon snack in one of the garbage bins. I stepped outside. The sun was extremely bright, to the point where I had to squint and put my hand over my eyes to even see the ground in front of me. I was trying to walk towards the van, but somehow I ended up in front of the trash bins where the animal's tail was sticking out from the turned-over silver garbage can. Its tail was wagging excitedly, and I remember thinking that it was much too large to be a squirrel. The animal bent down as if biting into something, and I heard the sound of its growl as it struggled to tug at whatever it was free from the barrel. Inch by inch, the creature backed out of the canister, and more of its sharp, sticky hairs were revealed. I heard something snap, then the creature leapt back, and I saw what it was chomping on. My eyes widened in horror as the pink tube of human intestine was pulled taut like the end of a tangled hose. Blood and entrails were spilling out of the human's open guts, and then behind the canine I saw a person's face. His face was pale white, his eyes closed, his hair was slicked back. It was Trent. Before I could react, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I whirled around and saw my dad, but no, it wasn't him. It was someone wearing a papier-mâché face mask that was painted to look like my dad. The forehead of the mask was already beginning to crack, white spots breaking off like sawdust. Through the cracks, I could see the figure's true form. I didn't know darkness had its own type of light, but that's the only way I could describe it. It was as if malevolence itself was reified into the skin, which was actually an amalgamation of millions of little, oozing parasites that leached into the nearby light. When it finally spoke, the demon's voice was a full octave lower than the old man's at the deli, and it had an earth-stilling gravitas.
"Today's the day,"
he sang and reached into his pocket, his lips curled upward in a foxy smirk.
"You have no idea how long I've waited for this day,"
he said, and he held up the razor blade. Half his facade had already fallen apart, and now I could see the bugs up close, writhing in what was either horror or ecstasy. And his scent was somehow more rank than the rabid coyote rummaging through the trash can with Trent's cut-open body inside. The demon closed in on my position, and in one decisive motion, he brought the blade close to his chin, and then sliced across my throat.
"Wake up!"
I jumped out of my bed and grabbed my throat, feeling the cold sting of its quick slice. Hyperventilating, I patted down the area, trying to hold all the blood in. But when I removed my hands, I saw that they were dry. It was only a dream, I thought. Gray light was only beginning to filter through the drapes. I'm in my hotel room. I'm safe. I tried consoling, but the pragmatic mental messages weren't enough to hold the force of my knees buckling. I dropped onto the carpet and cried for a long while. Outside, rain was beginning to fall. By the time I met up with Trent, I had already composed myself and decided to keep my dad's message and the nightmare to myself. None of it seemed exactly productive from a logical standpoint anyway, and I wanted to focus on the mission. We stopped by McDonald's and bought a couple cups of coffee. Trent asked if I wanted any food, and I declined. Black coffee seemed like it was the only thing my stomach could take at the present moment. I couldn't tell Trent I was hungry, but he tried playing it off, I guess to be respectful of me. I told him to knock it off and get something to eat. I didn't need my Caron getting lightheaded and dropping the paddle before he finished rowing me to hell. He didn't care much for my joke. But he ordered a couple of chicken McGriddles at the kiosk anyway. There were maybe 10 patrons spread throughout the restaurant, and we sat down in the same booth from the prior night, this time across from one another. Trent spent the first 10 minutes or so babbling about our fuel supply and the logistics of the trip from here on in. Practical stuff. I've come to realize that's how he deals with his stress. He talks it out in short, durable sentences. I mostly nod and watched as what looked like a storm closed in on the truck stop. The sky was overcast and there were darker clouds in the distance. The rain was still only a patter, but a middle-aged man wearing a yellow bow tie on the wall-mounted TV confirmed that there would be heavier rain and thunderstorms very soon. After the worker delivered Trent's food and he ate it in record time, I posed the one question that was still on my mind. How do I fight him? I asked. Trent finished a large gulp of his coffee and then looked at me. It was the first substantial thing I'd said all morning. Trent could tell something was off with me, but he figured there was no point in asking what it was. By him, I assume you mean the demon. I nodded. Trent licked his teeth clean. You could try praying again. I'm serious, I responded. I'm serious too. It worked before, didn't it? You mean at my house? Trent nodded. I thought you weren't a religious man. I'm not. Just a practical one. If praying worked before, maybe it'll work again. Is that the best you've got? Maybe? No, I've got a lot of shit better than a maybe, he answered. It's just not accessible where you're going, which is why I recommended not making contact in the first run. First run? So we're going to be doing this more than once? At least, Trent answered. Then, seeing my expression, he continued. What? You thought this was going to be a one and done? We have to conduct some research first. I did tell you this was new for me, right? Somehow Trent's response had set my mind at ease a little. I was going to have more than one chance. Of course, why wouldn't I be able to go back more than once? Why didn't you tell me this earlier? It would have gone a long way with easing my mind. Trent lifted his hands in defense. Sorry, I just thought that was a given. I mean, what we're doing is dangerous, just like I said, but it doesn't mean we aren't going to approach this safely and scientifically as possible. However, there is a different problem with running multiple trials. The organization? Well, that's right, Trent said like a proud parent. Our little experiment will be like a giant spotlight, and the longer we wait around after it's on us, the greater the chance we'll have unwelcome company. So, safe but speedy. Safe but speedy. Exactly. We fueled up and were back on the road a little after 8 o'clock. From that point on, Trent and I were absolutely silent. I had the distinct feeling of being in the eye of the storm. The pings moved closer commensurate with our progress towards the crash site. The cloud front continued its advance, and I noticed a haze beginning to descend on the road ahead of us. It was fog. We meandered further inland, the forest thickening around us until the rain almost stopped entirely, the leaves drinking it up before it fell on our windshields. I kept my eyes on the radar, and we were approaching the large yellow circle, which indicated we had arrived. As we pulled closer, I began to feel things. Fear, eeriness, doubt, then happiness, hope, love. Normally feelings like these had a clear source to picture, but these sensations came in waves without any discernible reason. It was almost as if they were blinking into existence inside of me. "Here we go," Trent said like an airplane pilot readying his crew for turbulence. I still recall the exact moment we crossed the boundary into the area of higher energy. It was like something just clicked in my brain, and all of a sudden everything felt so much closer. The sound of the rain against the trees was almost right next to my ears. The trees in the distance would oscillate between their position half a mile out, and then suddenly seem 5 meters away. If I focused on something long enough, it began to radiate those same ethereal particles as when Trent released Ava's phase lock. I checked to make sure the shifter wasn't set to TD, and sure enough, it was still in drive. "Can you see them?" Trent asked. "The shifts?" "Yeah," I said in a dreamy voice. I felt like I was driving through Wonderland. "It's the energy. I barely notice a difference. A bit of movement in the trees, but not much else. But I'm sure for you, this is a whole experience." "What is this?" I raised my hand and caught some of the pixel dust dripping off the sun visor. It disappeared when it made contact with my hand. "It's a kind of, a radiation. Everything emits it, just in different quantities. I'm still not exactly sure how it relates to the other realms, but I'm guessing it's some kind of primordial matter that helps connect our worlds." "It's beautiful," I exclaimed. "I wish I could see the world like this all the time." "Maybe you will," Trent whispered. As we arrived at the crash site, I began to get glimpses of the past. My childhood dreams and memories were pushing their way out from my subconscious. I noticed an increased number of blinks, which were validated by Ava, who reported the following. Currently detecting 14,350 novel emergences and 2,777 controlled agents. Net anomalies, 2,777. That's a lot of blinks, I remarked. Why doesn't Ava include them in the net anomalies? Trent turned his head so I couldn't see his smirk. Because blinks aren't anomalies. I thought about it for a second. Blinks aren't anomalies. I never thought about it that way. It's hard to think about it that way when the normal, for most people, means not picking up on fundamental aspects of reality, but that doesn't make it any less real. We continued past the epicenter of the yellow circle. "Why are we not stopping?" I asked. "I think we're already past the crash site." "It doesn't have to be exactly at the crash site," Trent said. "Plus, we don't want to stop on the side of the road and risk getting some civilian involved. There's a field about half a mile up ahead. I'm going to pull off the road and set up camp there." The field that Trent was referring to was actually a large clearing that dipped down into several trench-like troughs, which were filled to the brim with fog like witches' cauldrons. Further into the distance, I saw open fields, probably used for farming, and then a large hill where the trees once again reasserted themselves. We had pulled off the road and up a small incline where the trees had already been broken down, leaving a trail for us to drive through. When we surfaced at the edge of the clearing, Trent pulled up onto a flat bed of dried mud which was maybe 30 yards long. "Here," he said with a sigh. We both sat for a minute, looking around the field. We'd finally arrived. The rain was beginning to pick up, and the dark sky made it almost impossible to discern the time of day. "You ready?" Trent asked. I looked at him. Really looked at him. In his blue eyes. Was I ready? Did it even matter? "Let's do this," I said. This was the first time I was really able to inspect the back of Trent's van. He had talked up his gear a lot, and honestly I was impressed. And not in the way that a scientist is impressed by another scientist's lab. I wasn't that kind of expert. But it still seemed remarkably well managed. And now that I was in a state where my vision had been enhanced, I could actually see the enigmatic particles circulating through the pneumatic tubes which were coiled like pipes and valves of an elaborate wind instrument. The walls of the van itself were glistening white, making it easier to make out everything else inside. Along the floor were 5 overturned columns. Each column was dark and had a vibrating quality, as if they were charged with energy. Then, atop the center 3 columns was a smaller altar, which supported an apparatus with 2 skinny metal arms holding a silver halo. At present, the arms were folded, and the halo was suspended a few inches above the altar, face down. I thought maybe I'd see particles exuding from it. But instead, it was emitting visible waves which bent and warped everything they touched. "That thing's emitting a lot of energy," I remarked, gesturing towards the halo. Trent stepped in between the columns and started pulling out the packages he had stuffed in there yesterday. "Just wait till it turns on." Most of the packages contained only a single piece of equipment and were otherwise packaged with foam peanuts. We carefully removed each box and set them on the ground outside. I asked if the rain would damage the stuff inside, to which Trent only laughed and continued lugging out the boxes. When they were all out, Trent removed a box cutter from his pocket and went one by one opening them. There were 8 pieces in total. "What is it?" I asked as we fished the first item out. "It's another apparatus like the one inside, except it'll mount to the ground out here." I pulled out what looked like a metal tripod. "Good, that'll go at the bottom." "Where are we setting it up?" "Over here," Trent said, and stepped 5 paces away from the van. He coordinated himself up so he was centrally aligned with the inner ring, then stomped a few times. "This is the spot." As we continued to work, I asked Trent about how the whole contraption works. "Do you remember the first time we were in the van, when we had to escape from the semi-truck?" Trent asked and connected a secondary mounting apparatus to the top of the tripod. It had 4 spider-like legs that made right angles and stuck into the ground. "Of course," I said. "The phase lock." "Yeah," Trent said, and gestured towards the metal stick that was in my hand. I handed it to him. "The phase lock is the seal on the level of energy that the van is allowed to release. It also controls its dispersion pattern, so that it releases its energy in a steady wave. This allows Ava to scan for anomalies without causing us to become an anomaly." Trent stuck the plank into the neck of the tripod. "So, when you released the phase lock, we started emitting more energy." "That's right," Trent confirmed. "Enough to create an alternate route through a different realm." "So, we blinked into a different realm, and then back, just to avoid that truck." "That's right." "But why couldn't we just move out of the way?" "Because it had locked onto us. It was tracking our motion and adjusted its course based on the amount of energy we were emitting. So in order to escape, we had to radically skew our potential energy and then use it to shift." "Couldn't he have just followed us?" Trent connected 4 more pieces to the device, which now looked like an elaborate teepee. He was fishing in the last box when he spoke again. "Yeah, he could have, but it was highly improbable that he would have found us." Trent returned from the bottom of the box with another silver ring in hand. "Think of it like this. Let's say you're trying to escape from some bad guy who's coming after you, and you enter into a new room you've never seen before. Would you prefer this room to have 3 doors to go through, or 10? I thought about his riddle for a second, and then responded, "Well, it depends where they go." Trent fastened the ring to the top of the teepee. "Let's say they all lead to random places. Or let's say they're all closets that lead somewhere. The key is more is better, because the more doors he has to check, the less likely he is to pick the correct one. Make sense?" "So we opened a bunch of doors and escaped through one at random. Hence the gear TD for trap door." I marveled at the insights, but not for long. Trent hopped back up in the van and pulled a lever that I hadn't seen until now. The 2 metal arms raised the inner ring until it was perpendicular with the altar. Then Trent clicked one of the 3 red buttons along the back wall, and I saw what looked like a large glass eye suspended in a magnifying glass protruding from the wall, aligned with the center of both rings. A couple seconds later, the glass eye began to focus the energy which was being fed to it from the pneumatic tubes, and a blue pyramid of light projected from it into the first ring, then from the first ring into the second ring. All three pieces were alighted at slightly diminishing heights, so the cylinder of light beamed through the second ring into the ground. Alright, time for the first trial. I felt the nerves start up in my stomach. Trent sensed this and hopped out of the truck. It was raining quite hard now, though it was still warm. Both Trent and I were soaked, but that hardly concerned us. He reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. I know you're feeling scared, he said, but trust me on this. You're gonna do fine. Just keep in mind what we talked about. Stay a spectator, okay? I looked into his blue eyes, which seemed especially gray in the dark. Still, Trent's voice was reassuring. All I had to do was trust him, trust myself, trust my dad, and it was all going to turn out right. I'm ready, I said. Trent was still for a second, holding my eyes in his. He then guided me behind the outer ring and into the cylinder of light. Should I step into it now? I asked, afraid to be called away immediately. It's not on yet, don't worry. I still have to press another button. I followed Trent's instructions and stood in the blue light which was centered on my chest. Then I watched as Trent ran into the back of the van and posted up next to the glass eye. Ready? He yelled out. It was hard to hear him over the rain, but I yelled back, Ready! The next thing I saw was a blinding blue light beam from the van. I heard what sounded like a laser, and then I saw a cylinder oscillate, expanding and compressing. When the energy reached the second ring, I saw everything around me light up. It looked brighter than noon on a cloudless day. Then the oscillations made their way to me, and I was swallowed up whole. When I came to, I was in the back seat of a car. I felt my butt rumbling. Everything was dim and quiet. And then I heard a woman's voice from in front of me. Mark, please, not with Lauren in the back. The man, who I now identified as my father, pulled a cigarette away from his lips and blew the smoke at my mom. He eyed the back of the seat where I was sitting, using one of the 5 markers that hadn't rolled off my lap to color a rabbit in my animal coloring book. Kid's fine, he said, and he took another drag. Mark! My mom repeated. I saw my dad raise his hand in a rapid motion. I said, she's fine, Cheryl. Now check the map and make sure we're going the right way. I can't see shit with all this fog. I took a moment to make sure I was really in the back seat, and I patted myself. I clearly had weight. Then I tried touching the car. At first my fingertips met a solid surface, but when I tried to press through, my hand slipped into the car. I quickly pulled my hand away as if I had reached into a fire, and that's when I heard the little 3-year-old next to me start crying. I turned and saw that little me had dropped another couple markers onto the ground and was struggling to reach them. Hey, what did I say about crying? Quit it, Mark. She just dropped her markers, said my mom. She turned to help me pick them up. What did you say to me? Mark spat with a voice full of guile. He reached out and pushed her back into her seat. Don't, he commanded. She has to learn how to deal with life. Deal? My mom started in disbelief. Deal with life? Do you hear yourself? What's gotten into you? Sometimes shit happens. It doesn't give her the right to cry. You helping her is just gonna reinforce her behavior. Her behavior? What about your behavior? You're acting like a total dick. I didn't even have a moment to react before my dad's hand was across my mom's face. I felt the slap more than I heard it, my own face seeming to swell with the force of the blow. I saw my mom cover her mouth and lean away. The little me began to cry even louder, which only challenged my dad to step up his own volume. Everyone needs to get a fucking grip before I crash this car, my dad shouted, and took another drag. The scariest part was I couldn't tell if he was warning us or threatening us. I felt a sudden urge to do something. There was no way this was real. I was definitely in some fantasy concocted by the demon. He wanted me to turn against my dad. That was the only explanation for something like this. My dad was a good man. Not this. As I contemplated what to do, a golden light appeared behind little me's window. Apparently she saw it too, because her cries hushed as she traced the wisp with her eyes. After a second, the wisp transformed into a bunny rabbit, reminiscent of the one she was coloring. The rabbit hopped alongside the window and then did a couple circles in place. I watched little me let out a playful laugh and reach towards the window. What's going on back there? My dad asked with a scowl. Apparently the only sound more disturbing than cries were laughs. I looked back to the front and saw my mom wiping the blood from her lip. Her expression was miserable. Just leave her alone, Mark. I'll do what I damn well want to, Cheryl. It's my kid back there. My mom was quiet. When I looked back towards the rabbit, it was no longer a rabbit, but a person, or at least it looked like a person. The figure radiated pure gold, and atop his head was what appeared to be a king's crown. I recalled Allison's experience with seeing the sunlight figure in her moment of distress. Was that what was happening here? Was this really all true?
Hey!
My dad shouted, eyeing little me from the rearview window.
What are you reaching at?
I looked and saw the golden figure extending his hand towards the window, and little me's hand was reaching back.
Mom? Dad? It's bright.
Little me said. What's bright, honey? My mom asked.
Don't encourage her, Cheryl.
Someone there.
Little me shouted rapidly, and then dropped the rest of the markers and the coloring book onto the ground.
Who's there?
My mom asked.
Cheryl, I swear to God, sit the fuck down.
Everything from that moment on happened so quickly that I barely had any time to process it. My mom lifted out of her seat to either get little me's attention or to help me pick up the coloring book. My dad responded by grabbing onto her throat, letting go of the steering wheel entirely. He threw her back against the car door, and her head hit the window so hard the glass cracked. My dad dropped his cigarette, and I could smell the smoke coming from under his seat, but that didn't seem to bother him at all. He turned toward little me at the same moment my 3-year-old hand reached out and grabbed onto the golden figure, whose hand diffused through the window. When my dad turned, I got a whiff of the most awful smell that I wouldn't have been able to place had I not had that nightmare last night. He grabbed onto little me's shoulder and tugged her away from the golden figure that was trying to pull her the other way. My dad's facade began to crack, and I could see those dark bugs crawling out from the pores in his arms, marching down towards little me. I reacted. I grabbed onto my dad's arm and pulled him off little me. I heard the sound of my shirt ripping as it was torn from his grip and pulled out of the car, diffusing through it like a ghost. My brief victory was immediately overturned as I saw what was now clearly the demon smiling at me. His wretched fingers curled around my forearm.
Got you.
Then the whole world once again diffused into countless numbers of particles. Only this time, instead of riding through it, I felt like I was falling through an elevator shaft with each floor darker than the last. The farther I fell, the less I became aware of my surroundings, and the more I felt the deep sense of loneliness. It was as if I was the only person in the whole world, and the whole world was a prison designed entirely for me. This went on for so long, I began to forget who I was, where I was, what I was. And then I landed. My entire life had been a play stuck in the second act. That's the conflict one, before the resolution. I watched this movie in school once called The Great Gatsby, and there was this one line that really resonated with me. It went like this. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. The movie had been some kind of melodrama about a failed relationship, which frankly I didn't care for. But the line did help me understand that I was that boat, caught in a current and chasing a future that didn't exist. A future with any semblance of happiness. And so, I was beaten back, and back, and back again, forced to try and parse out a single silver lining from my past. A piece of nostalgia that would illuminate the ever-darkening sky of my life before I couldn't see anything at all ever again. Because the truth is that my life was, at best, a series of the most unlucky draws in the lottery of suffering. Or at worst, a prison designed specifically to maximize my suffering. Either way, it felt like I was in my own personal hell. And who was the curator of that hell? Who was the devil around which everything burned into ashes? It was none other than my own father. When I was 6 years old, my mom swallowed a bottle of Olazapram and was dead before breakfast. My dad woke me up, and the only thing he said to me was this. Hey, get up. Time to go to school. Mom died, by the way. Funeral's next week. The funeral happened exactly as he said. I remember my dad's solemn face as he spent 10 minutes talking about how devastated he felt in front of our entire extended family. At the end, he wiped the tears leaking from the corners of his eyes with a handkerchief. And that was the first and last time I ever remember my dad crying. Mainly because he never had to put on that kind of facade again. The next day, my dad hosted a different kind of event. It was a commemoration ceremony. I remember because the word commemoration confused me. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be happy or sad. I received my answer when I saw my dad popping streamers and laughing while dancing to cheerful music. The bitch is dead, the bitch is dead, 3 years and the bitch is dead. He chanted, and then stretched out his hand, offering me to join in the festivities. But I remained on the couch, confused and missing my mom. That was until my dad brought out my gift. I'm embarrassed to admit that I actually became excited when I saw the nicely wrapped red box and Cinderella-esque bow.
What is it, Daddy?
I asked with a tender curiosity. Open it and see! The wrapping didn't connect the two pieces of the box, so I needed only lift the lid to see what was inside. And when I did, 2 black puppy eyes stared up at me from inside the hidden chamber.
A puppy?
I squealed and threw off the lid, taking the little white Dalmatian into my arms and rocking it like a baby. You like him? My dad asked.
Mm-hmm.
I echoed out, nodding fervently. Then I watched my dad reach back into the red box and pull out a red collar. The name Lucky was engraved into the nylon strap, which, on second inspection, appeared much too large for my little puppy. My dad motioned towards Lucky, and when I handed him over, I watched my dad link the collar around his torso. That's not where collars go, I stated whimsically. It will be for now, until he grows into it, that is. But he never grew into it. Several weeks later, I remember waking up early in the morning having to pee. It was still dark outside, and the house was cool and quiet. I slipped out from under the covers and I walked down the hallway, not noticing what was laying on the floor until I stepped in it. At first, it sounded and felt like I had stepped on a very succulent chocolate cake, the fudgy kind with lots of mousse. And then when my foot stomped through the juicy flesh, I felt something sharp pierce my skin. I yelped and jumped back, feeling the sting of a gash. Then I let out a series of cries as I single-leg hopped to the light switch and turned it on. I remember my first thought was, how did roadkill get in our house? In the center of the hallway was a meaty salad of guts and muscle bits, dressed with blood. I remember thinking it was too perfectly set to have been roadkill. It was as if the animal had been ground up by some machine made precisely for this purpose. I took a step closer and saw that its hair was like a tiny folded carpet sloughed off from its body, and in the process of being painted red, I took another step, forgetting the pain in my foot entirely, and saw something stuck inside the mess that caught my eye. It took me a minute to realize what it was, but when it did, I fell to the ground. Some time passed. I'm not sure if I fainted or if I was having a seizure or what, but the next thing I remember, my dad was trudging up the wooden steps. He stopped in front of Lucky's eviscerated body and stared down at it for maybe 10 seconds. Then he reached down and pulled Lucky's collar out from his entrails. Organ flecks spilled off as he inspected it, and then he said something that I'll never forget. Why did you kill Lucky? I couldn't even speak. I was petrified. My dad asked again, this time louder. Did you hear me? Why did you kill Lucky? I wavered, feeling that if I spoke another word, a flood of tears would pour out from me, enough to fill the entire house. You, my dad mocked. You what, didn't kill him? He stepped over the corpse, and in his face I saw nothing. It was cold, completely void of any feeling. Well, maybe you didn't kill him, but you damn well let him die, didn't you? Some owner you are. He knelt down in front of me, where I was barely managing to hold myself up. I saw him unlock the collar and slip it around my neck. I felt Lucky's cold blood and little pieces of ground bone rub against my skin. Then I heard the snap of the device locking. Well, I'll show you how to be a proper owner, he said. The beating started soon after Lucky died. I'd spill a glass of water and take a punch to the stomach. Be careful, my dad would scold. And then on a different day, I'd try to do some cleaning and suddenly felt a boot press into my back. What do you think you're doing? Did I tell you to clean? It didn't matter what the reason was. There was always some reason that my behavior was unacceptable. On especially bad days, my dad would force me to sleep in Lucky's old kennel. It was a small metal wire cage. In order to fit, I'd have to curl up into the fetal position and stay that way all night. Then, in order to earn my release, I'd have to eat my breakfast out of Lucky's old food bowl. This was probably the most terrifying punishment for me, and my dad would use that to his advantage. He told me that if I ever mentioned anything that happened at home to anyone at school, he would lock me up in Lucky's kennel for a whole month. Needless to say, I was a very reserved and docile student. It also didn't help that my father was on the fast track to principal and then superintendent status at the local middle school. He was in good standing with the administrators, always offering to help lighten their loads, and networked well with other teachers. In the community's eyes, he was all PTA meetings and teacher barbecues. No one knew him the way I did. But that didn't stop them from judging me as his daughter. My reclusive personality was met by an anathema from teachers who expected more from me and thought I should speak up. This was further compounded by the fact that my grades were never perfect. Anytime I'd show up at home with a 100% on an assignment, my dad would drag me by the hair to the sink where he'd put soap in my eyes and then force me to wash it out. When I could finally see again, he had already ripped up the entire assignment and threw the shreds on the ground. Then he'd point to it and say, "That's what happens when you lie about your grades." I also became really good at applying makeup. My dad would never hit me in places that were easily visible. He was too smart for that. But even the places that weren't visible, he'd make sure I'd cover them with a pound of foundation. Eventually, I started doing the makeup myself merely because it was something that I could control. It was mine. There weren't many things that were. Around 4th grade, my dad started to childproof everything. Kitchen knives, silverware, even scissors were all held under lock and key. I was never allowed a curling iron or a hair blower, and other larger appliances like the stove were programmed to turn on with a password. At the time, I didn't understand why he was going to such length, but as I moved on to 5th and 6th grade, I began to understand. I didn't have any friends outside of school, and even in school, I was mostly a background noise to the main event happening everywhere around me. I was a spectator of what life should have been. I started to contemplate suicide often, but there was no way to follow through. Eventually, my dad brought home a woman. Her name was Alexandra, but she went by Alex. I was skeptical at first. She was a teacher at a middle school, but I noticed that my dad would postpone the beatings and swearings and all the horrible things until after she left. One day, I came home and it was just her in the kitchen making some soup. She asked me how my day was, and I didn't know what to say. I think I'd spoken a total of 200 words at home over the past 2 years. "Anything fun you're working on?" she asked. I had already started my Ancient Civilizations project, but I knew that if I showed my dad, he would probably throw it in the trash. For that reason, I left the project at school and worked on it during lunch while everyone else ate. I asked the art teacher if I could have access to some of her supplies, to which she agreed. My civilization was ancient Rome, and I was in the process of using Miss Whitaker's white pipe cleaners to try and make the Colosseum. I ended up telling Alex about the project. She asked if she could see it, to which I said no, and she pushed for an explanation. After a few minutes of pressing, she got me to say, "Because Dad wouldn't like it." "Like what, your diorama?" I nodded. "Well, it's not like you throw it out or anything." I was silent. When Alex saw my expression, she said, "Oh my God, is that something he'd do?" More silence. "Okay, how about you just show me then? I can take a look at your school if you'd like." I agreed, and over the next month, Alex would come visit me during the school lunch breaks and help me glue pieces to the shoebox lid that I used as the container. And we'd talk, and I began to really grow fond of her. One night, it was just Alex and I at the house. She was cooking again, and I felt a sudden urge to talk about Dad. I asked if I could tell her something, to which she responded, "You can talk to me about anything. What's on your mind?" She listened for a whole hour as I recounted all the events of my life. Everything that my dad had done to me, beginning with the commemoration ceremony and then Lucky and the collar and the cage, everything. Her eyes widened with each passing remark. And then we both heard the car door slam shut outside. "Shit, it's your father," Alex said. She looked down at me in utter horror. Okay, go up to your room. I'll deal with this." "Don't tell him," I begged, thinking about what would happen to both of us if he found out. "I won't," she promised. "This is above my pay grade. There's a bunch of people out there whose job is to help with just this. I know a few I can get in contact with. I'll do it secretly, okay?" I held her eyes for a second, realizing this must have been the first person I've ever trusted in maybe my whole life. And then I nodded and said, "Okay. Okay, good. Now go upstairs." I obeyed her instructions and ran up the stairs to my room, and I closed the door right as my dad entered the house. I pressed my ear up to the door and tried to hear what they were talking about. Apparently my dad was already in a bad mood because it sounded like they were arguing. Then I heard the front door open again, and then silence for a minute. The next sound I heard was 2 pairs of footsteps walking up the stairs. My heart sank deep into my stomach, and I backed to my bed. The doorknob twisted, and then 2 fingers merged. My eyes locked onto my diorama, which was being held in Alex's hands. "My diorama!" I yelled and ran towards it. But my dad kicked my chest, and I flew back against the side of my bed. I felt all the air compress in my lungs, and everything was spinning for a second. Then I was on my knees, coughing. "Put it down," my dad said to Alex. Alex placed a diorama on the ground in front of me. I couldn't even look in her eyes. I felt so betrayed. Why had I trusted her? "Please," I begged, crying. Then my dad brought his foot down on top of the newly finished Colosseum. Once, twice, and 3 times. I heard Alex suppress a giggle. I looked up and saw she was covering a wide smile. I cried out and she giggled again. "Can I try?" asked Alex. "Of course," replied my dad. "It was your idea after all." Alex smiled in delight as she stomped down on the diorama, destroying the little city I had built and all the people inside. Then she crushed each tree one by one. "Oh, that's good," she moaned, soaking in my defeated expressions as if she was siphoning my life force directly out of the air. "That's so good." I watched as she began to touch herself in an erotic way. She turned to my dad and started kissing him and then touching him, and then she stopped and looked at me. "Can I?" was all she asked. "Of course," my dad replied. After everything that transpired that night, I decided I was going to end my life as soon as possible. I no longer felt anything except complete emptiness. The only bit of emotion that I felt came a few days later when I was walking home from the bus stop and I saw the most beautiful glistening present in the middle of the road. I ran to it and picked up a razor blade that someone must have either dropped or discarded as trash. Lucky for me, it was the perfect treasure. I stashed the blade in my pocket and then I returned home. I didn't do it right away. Even though I was resolved to end my life, I needed a plan, a structure, a specific day. I decided that I would do it after school on Friday. I'd cap off the week with a one-way vacation. That night I went through the whole day in my mind. I pictured waking up, eating a bowl of cereal. My dad might be in a good mood and leave me alone. Or maybe he'd harass me. Then he'd drive me to school. I'd be quiet in the car and then quiet in all my classes, biding my time. My dad was the principal, so he stayed late, which meant I'd either have to take the bus or walk home. I decided to walk. No need to speed things up too fast. I'd enjoy the last moments of life. Then I'd get home and go upstairs. Alex might be there. Thankfully, she would only acknowledge my existence when my dad was around now. It's like I was a toy that she had used once and then grown bored of. I would get the razor blade out from the dresser drawer and then lock myself in the bathroom. I'd draw a hot bath and then get in, letting my arms soak in the warm water. And then once everything was loose, I'd use the blade. 2 quick cuts, and then I could rest at last. My eyes were heavy, and I drifted asleep to the comforting thought of eternal peace. Friday arrived, and already something was off. I woke up to the scent of bacon. My mouth was salivating as I pictured a full-course breakfast with bacon and cheesy eggs and homemade pancakes. But I'd never had any of those things. My dad never made me breakfast. So why was I crying now while thinking about something that never happened? Something that couldn't happen. The scent turned off like a switch, and when I went downstairs, sure enough, there was no Grand Slam on the stovetop. My dad eyed me from behind the newspaper as my momentary intrigue dissolved back into mundane reality. He put down the paper and shot up from his chair in a fashion which I swore I had seen before. Seeing him tower over me like that filled me with dread, and I tensed the muscles in my stomach as he approached, circling around me like a shark, as if he could smell my blood in the water. "Alex!" he called, walking away, leaving me alone in the scentless kitchen. I released a stale breath and reminded myself that soon this would all be over. But the odd occurrences didn't stop there. They strung together throughout the day, beginning with the smell of breakfast. Then during gym class, we played a pickup soccer game. Normally I was the last pick, and I'd often make the corner kick area my home. But today one of the captains, Claire, picked me first. I almost couldn't believe it until she called my name again, and I noticed everyone was staring at me. Then, during lunch, I was moving through the hot lunch line, collecting each scoop of jail food on my tray when I saw one of the lunch ladies handing me what looked like an ice cream cone over the glass divider. It startled me, because the cone was dripping red. At first I thought it was blood, but when I realized it was some kind of sugar topping, I reached out to grab it. "What are you doing?" the person behind me asked. I turned to look at him, and then back to the cone, but it was gone. All day, classes had been shortened to make room for an assembly. I hated assemblies, mainly because I hated being packed in like a sardine and surrounded by the scrutiny of people's eyes. Still, I was able to find a spot off near the corner. Only 4 bleachers up. Earlier in the year, we had a magic show. Then a mad scientist came and did some wonky experiments. This time someone was talking about global warming. I'll be honest, when he mentioned the time frames for the effect of climate change, I immediately zoned out. I didn't have that kind of time. Unless an asteroid landed or an alien invasion commenced in the next few hours, nothing would matter. Even then, my result would be the same. But something happened during the presentation. I can't really describe it other than how it looks for an old video game cassette to glitch or a flame to flicker. I swear 1 second the man was talking about global warming, and the next, there was a priest, a small black man wearing black robes with a white collar, standing center stage, speaking to the crowd. It only lasted for a short space of time, but what he said reached deep down into my mind and plucked at a string I didn't know existed there. "So, my brothers and sisters, if you are ever in distress, reach out to the Lord, and he will offer peace." The transition was so extreme, I nearly turned to the nearby kids and asked if they saw it too, but judging from their bored expressions, I figured they hadn't. It continued on my walk home. Little things like plants and trees popping out of existence and then back into it, as if something was calling the objects of this world away, but something else was fighting their release. Reality destabilized as I observed the shifting colors of street signs and the phasing in and out of vehicles. I started to run, only stopping once at a crosswalk. Next to me, a large fuel-guzzling truck was playing a song that sounded so familiar. The guitar riffs, the drums, the opening lyrics. "Winter is here, O Lord. Haven't been home in a year or more. I hope she holds on a little longer." When I finally arrived home, I slammed the door shut and autopiloted it up to my room. Fortunately, Alex wasn't there. I quickly retrieved the razor blade from the bottom of the drawer where I had stashed it in a pair of socks, and then I sprinted up to the bathroom and slammed the door, locking it. It was the only door in the whole house I could lock. I leaned back against it, and then slid down to the floor. My heart was pounding. I felt tears well up in my eyes. But the job wasn't done. I stood up and turned on the bath water, and then I plugged the drain. This was the hardest part, the minutes of agony as I watched the water level rise in the basin. I tried to keep my mind clear. This was all business. A job that needed to be completed. That's how I had to think about it, or else I could never go through with it. When the water had sufficiently risen, I stepped into the wet warmth, razor blade in hand, and stretched my legs out to the other end of the bath. I let my arms soak, trying to ignore my reflection in the murky water. My heart never stopped beating, and all I could think about was the blood pulsing through my veins. I lifted my arm out of the water, and I was wearing a t-shirt so I wouldn't have to roll up my sleeve. Then I brought the corner of the blade to my forearm and pressed it in. The skin parted easily, and I saw a trickle of thin red blood roll down my arm like a dribble of tomato juice. My heart had now swelled to encompass my whole world, a singular beating. Oh, please, God, if you're there, please, 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 please help me. The prayer was almost automatic, like I had pressed a button in my mind and it just came out. I'm still not sure if I spoke the words or merely thought them, or if I even thought them at all. But the response was immediate. Tap, tap, tap. The eerie sound reverberating through the hollow acoustics of my skull. My eyes, which were trained on the small stream of blood tracking down my arm, turned and saw something else red that hadn't been there before. In fact, there were many red things. A large vine started up near the half-open windowsill and had grown all the way down to the floor, tomatoes hanging like ornaments off the stem and carrying on towards the bath. I reached down and plucked one of the ripe, red fruits, holding it up in the air, and it felt real. So real. But how could that be? Just then, I heard the sound of car tires screeching outside as someone drove recklessly around the bend. I already knew who it was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of my dad's car door slamming shut. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came again. I stood up, dirty water pouring off of me and assimilating back into the bath. I heard the front door swing open, making contact with the wall, then fast footsteps up the flight of stairs. I stepped out of the bath, nearly slipping and falling onto the ground.
Lauren!
My dad shouted.
What the fuck do you think you're doing?
I froze in place, looking back at the locked door. My dad was already pounding on it. I could feel my heart thumping again. My habit to freeze in terror seized all the muscles in my body, and then from behind me, tap, tap, tap.
You open this door right now or I break it down, do you hear me? I can do a lot worse than put you in that damn kennel.
I ignored my dad. I spun around and threw open the drapes. At first, I thought the sun was directly behind the window. I had to squint to even keep my eyes open. The light was so bright. And then I saw it. Or rather, I saw him. He was an angel, wearing a crown of gold. I saw him tap 3 more times.
Alright, here I come,
said my dad. Then he charged into the door. The worn hinges let out a groan, but they didn't give. Not yet. I stepped up to the window, and then twisted the lock, and then I pulled the window up as high as it would go. At the same moment, my dad charged again, and the door burst open. But it wasn't my dad, not anymore. It was some dark demon with his skin stitched from worm-like insects. There was an almost imperceptible moment of silent standoff as the two beings stared one another down. And then, reaching out towards the light, the angel swept into the room and assimilated into my body. The demon roared, charging at me with his fist drawn, ready to strike. But it was too late for him. I could see everything now. All of his manipulations, his deceits. This entire world was a lie. I reached out, holding up the universal sign of stop, and trapped him in an invisible box. He mimed hatred and struggled against the restraints, but it was futile. I closed my hand and he exploded like a squashed bug. And I was ascending through another worldly space. I saw fragments of other lives all stitched together through several archetypes, and each one led back to the same point. I emerged there, outside the SUV where my mom and dad were still trapped with the demon. The car swerved into the oncoming lane just in time for the passenger side door to meet the dump truck that was hauling lumber. There was a giant snapping sound, like a tree being pulled apart at the stump. Then the sound of crushing metal reverberated through the air with enough force to feel the vibrations in my chest. From behind me, little me began to cry out, calling for Dad. I turned in time to see the angel, who was standing at little me's side, fly with an incredible velocity towards the wreck. My dad tumbled out of the driver's side door, worse for wear, and the angel entered into him. I saw a flash of brilliance, and then I was ascending again. At each passing floor, I saw the major events of my life play out as they really happened. I saw my home filled with love, which was actually the scent of bacon in the morning. I saw ice cream cones and cartons, soccer games with my dad in the bleachers, and I heard music. Then I saw myself growing up, making friends and attending college, a complete life. And then the skies overhead filled with dark storm clouds, which were throwing javelins of lightning. I felt the raindrops landing on my head and trickling down my face. In the distance, I saw the force of all that was evil in the world. The demon was standing at the top of the hill just past the field. My eyes were different now, and I could see my dad was still in there. The demon was like a parasitic skin that leached onto anything it could control. It was powerful. Powerful enough to command the storm. However, even though the sky was filled with clouds, everything to me appeared to radiate with the duality of darkness and light, which ebbed and flowed, a swirling of enigmatic particles in constant battle. Was this what the world was really made of? I wondered. And as if in answer to my question, I felt a sense of affirmation. I looked down at my hand and saw that I was radiating with the light of the angel who had saved me. Was this his power? I suddenly noticed the thousands of small presences which had encircled us. The hellish coyotes had closed the barrier to a radius of a quarter mile, starting at the hill where the demon was located, and then looping around the SUV on either side. I saw them scrape their paws against the muddy ground and growl with reserved hostility. My senses had been so augmented that I could hear their teeth chatter with ferocious excitement. And then I looked back toward the SUV, and I saw the teepee Trent and I had erected was fried, metal pieces broken and littered all over the place. Trent was several paces in front of the van, holding a large rectangular-shaped gun, the butt resting on his shoulder like a kind of RPG. The gun contained a massive amount of compressed energy.
"Lauren, get back in the van!"
Trent shouted over the rain.
"I'll hold him off!"
I didn't have time to explain to Trent what I was thinking. If I did, I would have told him that those coyotes lining in the field around us were like tiny candle lights that only needed a good blow to be extinguished. And that somewhere deep inside, another being with power he couldn't even imagine was telling me, not through words, but through more direct method of communication, that I need only lift my hand and touch the sky, and the storm would pass. I recalled when I first entered the zone of higher energy, specifically how close everything felt, and now I understood what that meant. I took a step forward in lieu of the beckoning commands of my friend. The demon called the beasts to attention like the starter of a race, and I saw each of the multitude set back on their hind legs. Then he fired, and the coyotes charged towards us. I felt a large discharge of energy as Trent shot the gun as it was coming up from the east, but I didn't react. I waited 5 seconds, and then 10. The beasts were almost falling over themselves as the gap closed and they came closer and closer. Then I lifted my hand just as the voice in my head had instructed, and I touched the sky, dragging my fingers through the storm clouds and ripping open 5 long streaks. The light beamed down as crepuscular rays, and I guided them with my hand like a group of lasers, evaporating each coyote that came into contact with it. It only took 10 seconds to recall every single one of them to whatever hellish realm they came from. The last of the pack tried running back towards the shadows of the dark clouds that still spotted the sky, but I was quicker than them. Once they were dealt with, I took another few steps forward. "Lauren!" I heard Trent call out from behind me. I stopped and turned, seeing Trent soaked in his jumpsuit, gun still held at attention. In my current state, I could also see a gray static in his eyes that continued back into his head, shrouding his brain. "Trust me," I called back. "I can do this." After a moment, I saw him relax his shoulders, letting the gun fall forward. Then the static in his eyes and around his head dissipated, and he nodded. "Okay, you go get him then." I turned back to the demon, who was now at the end of the 30-yard field. While I was moving the light, I had targeted the demon with it, but even as it passed over him, it had no effect. He was too powerful. Moreover, the giant cumulonimbus that was located directly over his head was unreachable, meaning he'd always have a decent radius of direct shade. I watched him advance another step forward, and then I saw the figures emerge from the shadows directly around him. They were all humanoid and made of similar material as the demon himself, but they were hollow, like the chocolate Easter bunny candies they sell at Easter.
So I see you've grown a liking for this one.
The demon's voice projected as if from a bullhorn.
Too bad I'm going to have to kill her.
I took a deep breath and then closed my eyes. Even when they were closed, I could still see. In fact, my sight was probably even better with them closed. There was less interference. I only saw the shifting in and out of particle clouds, each taking on one of two valences. Just as before, I intuited my next move. I waited for the party of shadows to advance a little further, and then, while holding my eyes closed, I outstretched my right hand as if I were offering a handshake to my enemies. Focusing hard enough, I was able to move this zone of energy, and I grabbed onto and stitched together the light particles into a bow and several arrows. When I opened my eyes, it was still there. The shadowy figures charged me, scaling out in either direction like a net, hoping to evade my shots. I pulled the first arrow back, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Time slowed down, and I could see my target. But more than see it, I could feel it. I released the first arrow, and it traveled faster than sound through the leftmost shadow. The energy released was so intense that it caused a gale to stir. The shadow vanished instantly upon contact. The demon stopped, grimacing at his destroyed henchman. But I didn't waste any time. Pulled back another arrow, and then another, and another, until all 7 of the monsters had been banished from this world. I sprinted a few steps to the right, and then stopped and pulled an 8th arrow, letting it loose in the direction of the demon. At first, I saw a blinding spark and I thought I'd hit him, but the spark slowly extinguished like a fire that was letting off the gas. When it was almost gone, I saw the demon's hand had grasped onto the arrow, and the little parasites that had made up his skin were eating it like a full-course meal. I could hear them. They sounded like someone without any gums chewing on raw ground beef. It was sloppy, and when they finished, I could sense their insatiable lust for more. The demon sighed, shrugging his shoulders and allowing his arms to fall on either side.
Well, fine, he drawled. I guess I'll do it myself. The demon smirked. Can't have someone like you walking around now, can we? Now that you really see us.
There was a moment of silence. Then, faster than I could blink, a sword slipped into the demon's hand and he shifted 2 yards in front of me. I would have died right then and there if the angel didn't partly dissociate from me and reach out to grab the blade before it made contact with my neck. Apparently, this is what the demon wanted, though, because his smirk grew wider.
Yes, that's right. Get out of there,
he said while grabbing onto my arm and pulling it with all the force of a conveyor belt that snagged an article of clothing. I tried tugging away, but his grip was unbelievably strong. I could feel my own power start to weaken as the angel was pulled further and further out of me. In a split-second decision, which was more of a desperate reaction, I leapt forward and bit down on the demon's arm. He roared in pain, and I felt his fingers release the grip on me. I tumbled backward, feeling most of my strength return as the angel reassimilated into my skin.
You absolute cunt!
The demon swore, gripping his arm, which was dripping with red bugs around the area I had bitten.
You're going to pay for that!
I spat out some of the disgusting maggots that had found their way into my mouth. Then I closed my eyes and conjured a sword. It manifested even quicker than the bow. The demon didn't waste any time blinking in for another strike. This time I could see it. I blocked a series of blows, but he was too fast for me to counter. I swung at his right side and he parried, slicing at my chest. The blade made contact with my shirt and cut the skin down to my ribs. I felt the searing heat of the wound and I backed up a few steps, clutching it. The demon didn't want to let me recover. He was on me again with a downward slash, and I dodged it by spinning to the left and leaping back.
Come on. I'm getting bored.
The demon croaked. His arm had already recovered, while my stomach was continuing to bleed. How is this fair? How was I supposed to beat this ancient demon that had thousands, millions of times the battle experience that I had? I tried to contact the angel that was still within me, but it didn't answer. Why was he quiet now? Was he tired? Was the light really this weak? I dodged and deflected another series of slashes. Was this how it all ended? I tried to think back to anything that would give me the slightest edge. Hadn't I stopped him before? Hadn't I banished him? How did I do that? Because there's no way I could hurt him. The only time I ever even got close was when I bit his arm, and that's only because he was practically on top of me. And then it hit me. I didn't know if it would work, or even if it made sense, but I dropped my sword and I saw the demon's eyes light up, and his smirk grew to Cheshire proportions. I closed my eyes and focused everything on the space directly between us, knowing that he would shift imperceptibly fast. I stitched together a blanket of particles that would slow him down and increase my ability to detect him. When he traveled through it, I could sense the position of his body at every moment, including the shifting weight of his energy. I honed in on him. Not the demon, but the man inside. The man who the demon wanted me to forget. The man who I loved. I reached both arms out just as the demon was upon me, and I wrapped them around my dad's torso.
I love you more than anything too, Dad.
I cried out.
Please come back to me.
The earth stilled. I remember feeling the spirit that was inside of me swell into the air around me. And then it was gone. All my abilities vanished. I was only a woman standing in the middle of the muddy field, holding her dad. The skies above me were blue with not a cloud in sight. I pulled back and saw my dad's face. His true face. In what felt like so long. His eyes were closed, but he was breathing. He must have been exhausted. Lauren, Trent said. He was right beside me now.
We've got to go. They're here.
I didn't have my super hearing anymore, so it took a second to notice the sound of helicopter wings approaching from two directions. It was the organization.
Come on, I'll help you bring him to the van,
Trent said. We fit him in the seat next to me. I had to scoot part of my butt onto the center console, but I didn't mind. The helicopters were above us now, and we could see the black SUVs heading into the trail behind us.
Shit.
Trent murmured. Use the trapdoor, I said.
I don't know if I can direct it. The distance is too far.
I can direct it, I answered. Just use it. He looked at me the same way as earlier, as if he couldn't really believe it was me. Weren't you the one touting my potential? I asked. Come on. Trust me, I'll get us through this. Trent looked from me to my dad and then back to me.
Well, shit,
he said and grabbed the shifter.
Ava, you know what to do. Release phase lock.
Phase lock? Release. Ava chimed back. Shift. And then we were once again traveling through a world yet unknown to mankind. I've written all of this from a cafe near my house. This will be the last update before I go dark. Like Trent, I think keeping my comings and goings anonymous might be for the best from here on out. I want to thank everyone who has stuck along this journey with me and offered support. This is by far the craziest and most difficult thing I've ever confronted. And needless to say, it's changed my life profoundly. I've learned that the phrase, everything happens for a reason, has more truth to it than it may first appear. We are subject to forces which go well beyond the understanding of modern science. And yet, it's through us that those forces act. In a way, we really are the playthings of the gods. But in a different way, we can directly influence the control they have over us. It's a fine line, but one that I guess I'm going to have to figure out. Speaking directly now to the organization, you have no idea what you're doing. You think you're harnessing some kind of otherworldly energy for your selfish means, but you're wrong. This energy can't be harnessed. It's not ours. And if you do try to harness it, something else will be harnessing it through you. I just hope for your sake that something isn't a demon. Now, if you'll excuse me, my dad and I are going to visit one of my old friends at a barbecue. If we don't speak again, I hope you have a wonderful life. Never forget, you're not alone. Thank you, Nick Weathers, for writing this. I really appreciated narrating this. I hope you liked my narrations. I hope everybody liked the narrations in this. This was a lot of fun. I did a lot of learning throughout this series. If you listen to the audio from right now, and then if you skip back to the beginning of the video, you can definitely hear the difference in audio quality. I learned a lot with the series. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you. Thank you for listening.